Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step out into a world that has just been remade by snow, where every familiar path is softened, every sound dulled, and the night seems to stretch a little longer than it should. You stand at the edge of your doorway looking out across a yard that no longer feels entirely like yours. The ground has disappeared beneath a pale, unbroken surface, and the air carries that quiet stillness that only arrives when winter truly settles in. It is peaceful, yes, but also a little unforgiving. After all, this is the kind of place where you probably would not survive very long without preparation, and certainly not comfortably. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always nice to imagine these stories travelling quietly across different nights. Now dim the lights, you step forward into the cold, and the first thing you notice is how it changes the way everything feels. The snow beneath your boots compresses with a soft measured sound, not quite a crunch, not quite a whisper. It slows you down without asking permission. Each step becomes deliberate, as if the ground itself is encouraging you to move more carefully, more thoughtfully. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in early 1800s, America winter nights were not just longer in a poetic sense. They were physically longer experiences because artificial light was limited and expensive, meaning most activity followed the rhythm of daylight. When the sun disappeared, early life narrowed inward. You can feel that narrowing now even as you stand outside, because the darkness does not simply arrive. It settles. You draw in a breath and the air feels sharp in your chest. It carries a faint scent of wood smoke drifting from somewhere nearby. That smell is not just comforting, it is essential. It means someone has managed to keep a fire going, which in this kind of cold is less of a luxury and more of a quiet triumph. There is a small detail that often goes unnoticed in discussions of winter life during this period. Some families would pack snow tightly against the outer walls of their homes, not as a burden, but as a form of insulation. It sounds counterintuitive using cold to fight cold, but the packed snow could actually block wind and preserve warmth inside. You might glance back at the house now, and imagine that layer forming over time, slowly turning the structure into something that resists the night. You take another step and the world remains still. Too still, perhaps. Even the usual sounds of distant movement seem absent. No wheels on the road, no voices carrying across the open space, just the faint sigh of wind moving across the surface of the snow. It creates a kind of quiet that feels complete, almost as if the night has closed in around you. People living through these winters would have been deeply familiar with this sensation. There is an ongoing discussion among scholars about whether this profound quiet shaped how individuals experienced time itself. Did the absence of noise and activity make nights feel longer, or did the predictable rhythm of winter actually create a sense of calm that shortened the perceived passage of hours? Standing here, you might find it difficult to decide. The silence stretches, but it does not feel empty. You shift your weight, noticing how quickly the cold begins to press through your clothing. It is not immediate discomfort. It is gradual, patient. The kind of cold that waits knowing it will eventually make itself known. This is where the reality of winter living begins to reveal itself. Without proper layers, without movement, the body begins to surrender warmth, almost without noticing. You glance toward the horizon, though it is hard to tell where the land ends and the sky begins. The snow reflects what little light remains, creating a faint glow that lingers even after the sun has gone. It is enough to see by barely, but it gives the landscape a strange, almost dreamlike quality. Shapes blur, distances become uncertain. There is a lesser-known anecdote from rural communities during this era that speaks to how people adapted to such conditions. Some individuals developed an ability to navigate familiar paths at night, almost entirely by memory, using subtle differences in terrain and the faint outlines of structures to guide them. It was not quite instinct, but something close to it built over many winters like this one. You take a few more steps, then pause. There is no real reason to go farther. That is another quiet truth about long winter nights. Movement becomes purposeful, not casual. You do not wander simply because you feel like it. Every step has a reason, whether it is gathering wood, checking on animals, or moving between one shelter and another. Standing here without a task, you begin to understand how unusual that is. You turn back toward the house. The light from within is faint but steady. It spills out through the small window, creating a soft contrast against the surrounding darkness. That light represents more than visibility. It represents warmth, safety, and the presence of others. In a season like this, those things are closely tied together. As you approach, the sound of your steps becomes slightly louder, the snow more compacted near the entrance. The door itself looks simple, sturdy in a way that suggests it has been relied upon many times before. You reach out your hand, brushing against the wood, and even through your glove you can feel the cold it holds. Inside you know it will be different. Not dramatically warmer perhaps, but enough to matter. Enough to create a boundary between the outside world and the one you inhabit through the night. You pause for a moment before opening the door. Behind you the snow continues to fall light and steady, adding to the quiet accumulation that will reshape everything by morning. Ahead of you there is firelight, voices, and the slow passage of hours that define winter nights in this time. You step inside. The transition is immediate though subtle. The air shifts. The sounds change. The stillness outside gives way to a softer, more layered quiet. The kind that holds small movements and gentle rhythms rather than complete silence. And as the door closes behind you, the long winter night truly begins. The door settles into place behind you with a soft, final sound, and almost at once the world outside feels farther away than the few steps you just took. The cold does not vanish, not entirely, but it loosens its grip. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim interior, and you notice how the air carries a different weight here. It is warmer, yes, but also thicker, touched by smoke, wool, and the faint lingering scent of whatever has been cooked earlier in the day. You do not rush forward. Instead, you remain near the entrance, aware of how quickly the cold has followed you in. It clings to your clothing, to your boots, to the edges of your sleeves. People living in early 1800s, America understood this small but important detail very well. One commonly accepted historical detail is that doorways often acted as informal barriers, places where snow could be brushed away, outer layers shaken off, and the outside kept from fully entering the home. It was not the perfect system, but it helped. You begin to move slowly, your boots making a dull, softened sound against the wooden floor. The boards feel firm beneath you, but there is a faint chill rising from them, as if the ground itself is reminding you that warmth here is something maintained, not guaranteed. The walls around you are simple. Wooden planks fitted together, sometimes carefully, sometimes less so. In daylight you might notice the narrow gaps between them. At night those gaps become something else entirely. You can feel them more than see them. Thin lines where the outside world presses inward. Cold air finds its way through, subtle but persistent. There is an interesting detail that many people overlook. Some households would stuff cloth moss or even scraps of paper into these cracks during the winter months. It was a quiet form of insulation, improvised and imperfect, but often effective enough to make a difference. You might imagine someone doing that earlier in the season, moving slowly along these very walls, pressing material into each opening with careful hands. You draw your coat closer around you even as the room begins to feel less severe than the air outside. The warmth here is uneven. It gathers in certain places and fades in others. Near the hearth it will be stronger. Near the walls it lingers just enough to take the edge off. A faint sound reaches you. Not loud. Not even distinct at first. Just a small movement somewhere deeper in the house. Perhaps someone shifting in a chair. Perhaps the gentle adjustment of wood in the fire. It reminds you that this space is not empty. It is lived in quietly, steadily. You take another step forward and your body begins to respond to the change in temperature. The stiffness in your fingers softens slightly. The sharpness in your breathing eases. It is not immediate comfort, but it is enough to feel. There has long been a discussion among historians about how people perceived indoor warmth during this period. Some suggest that individuals were far more accustomed to lower temperatures than we are today, finding comfort in conditions that might feel cold to modern senses. Others believe that people simply endured it, accepting a level of discomfort as normal. As you stand here somewhere between cold and warmth, you can sense how both ideas might hold some truth. You reach up and begin to remove your outer layer slowly, deliberately. The fabric feels heavy, holding onto the chill it gathered outside. As you set it aside, you become more aware of the air against your inner clothing. It is still cool, but no longer biting. The light in the room is low. It comes from a single source somewhere ahead, and it does not fill the space so much as it shapes it. Corners remain in shadow. Edges blur. Objects appear only as outlines until you move closer to them. This is another quiet reality of long winter nights. Light is not something you take for granted. It is something you manage carefully. A lesser-known detail from this time is that candles were often used sparingly, not because they were ineffective, but because they required resources. Tallow had to be rendered. Wax had to be gathered. Each flame represented effort, time, and material. So people learned to live with less light, to let their eyes adapt, to move through dimness without resistance. You pause again, listening. The house has its own rhythm, a faint crackle from the fire, the soft shift of wood as it expands and contracts, perhaps the quiet breathing of someone nearby. These sounds do not interrupt the silence. They become part of it, creating a kind of layered stillness that feels steady rather than empty. You step closer to the source of light. As you move, you begin to notice the small details that define the space. A table worn smooth by years of use. A chair positioned just so, as if it has been returned to the same place night after night. Tools set aside with care, ready to be used again when needed. Nothing here feels random. Everything has a place shaped by routine and necessity. The cold still lingers at the edges. You can feel it near the floor, along the walls, in the spaces where warmth does not quite reach. It is a reminder that this shelter is not separate from the outside world, only protected from it to a certain degree. There is a curious observation recorded in accounts from rural households of this era. Some people would intentionally leave certain areas of the home unheated, concentrating warmth in a single room to conserve fuel. It meant that parts of the house remained cold throughout the night, spaces passed through quickly rather than occupied. You can imagine those darker rooms now just beyond your sight, holding onto the chill like quiet extensions of the outdoors. You move a little farther, drawn by the steady glow ahead. The warmth becomes more noticeable with each step, not overwhelming but consistent. It gathers around you, softening the air, easing the tension in your shoulders. You realize how much your body has been holding onto that cold, how gradually it begins to let go. And yet even here, comfort is measured. You're not stepping into a fully heated space. You're stepping into a balance where warmth and cold exist together, each shaping the experience of the other. You slow your pace. There is no need to hurry. The night outside will continue for many hours, and inside time moves differently, more quietly, more steadily. Each moment stretches just enough to be noticed. You glance back once toward the door. It stands closed firm against the cold, holding the boundary between two very different worlds. Beyond it, the snow continues to fall, the silence deepens, and the landscape waits. Inside you remain, and as you take another careful step toward the firelight, you begin to understand that surviving long winter nights is not about escaping the cold entirely. It is about learning how to live beside it. You move closer to the hearth, and the change is subtle at first, then unmistakable. The air shifts from cool to gently warm, wrapping around your hands and face in a way that feels almost like relief. It is not the kind of heat that fills a room evenly. It gathers, concentrates, and fades as you step away. Still, it is enough to draw you in. The fire itself rests low but steady. Flames move in small, deliberate motions, rising and folding back into themselves as they consume the wood. The light they cast is soft and uneven, stretching across the room in quiet pulses. Shadows lengthen and shorten without warning, giving the space a kind of slow, living rhythm. You stop just close enough to feel the warmth without overwhelming it. Your hands lift slightly, almost without thinking, turning toward the fire. The skin there responds first to gentle loosening as the cold begins to fade. It is a small comfort, but a meaningful one. In a time like this, moments of warmth are noticed, not ignored. A well-established historical understanding reminds us that in early 1800s, America the hearth was not just a source of heat. It was the centre of domestic life during winter. Cooking, mending, resting, even quiet conversation all gathered around this single point. Entire evenings could unfold within its reach, shaped by the steady presence of fire. You watch as one piece of wood settles inward, sending a brief shower of tiny sparks upward before they vanish. The sound is soft, a faint crackle that blends into the background. It is not disruptive, it is reassuring. There is a small detail that often surprises people. Some households would keep embers alive through the night by covering them carefully with ash. In the morning, those embers could be stirred back into flame without needing to start a fire from nothing. It saved time, effort, and precious resources. You might imagine someone earlier in the evening tending to that task, arranging the fire not just for now, but for the hours ahead. You shift your stance, feeling the warmth reach further into your body. Your shoulders ease, your breathing slows. The contrast between outside and inside becomes clearer with each passing moment. And yet the heat is not constant. It rises and falls depending on how the fire is fed, how the wood is arranged, how much fuel remains. This is not a system you can ignore. It requires attention, quiet and regular. There has long been a discussion among historians about how much time people in this period spent maintaining their fires. Some suggest it was a near constant responsibility. During winter nights, a task woven into every other activity. Others believe it was more intermittent, with careful planning reducing the need for frequent adjustments. As you stand here watching the fire shift and settle, it becomes easy to imagine both possibilities. You take a small step to the side and the warmth fades slightly. It reminds you how localized this comfort is. Just a few feet away, the air grows cooler again, the edges of the room returning to their earlier chill. This creates a natural gathering point. You can see it in the arrangement of the space. A chair positioned near the fire, a low stool set just within reach, perhaps a blanket folded nearby ready to be pulled closer as the night deepens. Nothing here is accidental. Everything bends gently toward the hearth. You lower yourself into the chair, the wood beneath you firm but familiar. The position feels natural, as if it has been used many times before. Your hands rest in your lap for a moment, then drift again toward the warmth. The firelight plays across the surfaces around you. It catches on the edge of a tool, glints faintly against a metal pot, softens the lines of the walls. It does not reveal everything. It suggests more than it shows. This is how light works here, not as a full illumination, but as a guide. A lesser-known habit from this time involves how people judge the passing of time by the behaviour of the fire itself. The way wood burned, the rate at which embers formed, even the sound of the flames, could offer quiet clues about how long the night had progressed. Without clocks in every home, these small observations became part of daily awareness. You listen again. The fire speaks in small sounds, a soft pop, a gentle shift, the faint hiss of sap within the wood. Each one blends into the next, forming a steady background that anchors the room. Beyond that, there is little else. No distant noise from outside, no sudden interruption. Just the contained, careful life of the interior space. You become aware of how your body settles in response. The tension you carried from the cold begins to release more fully. Your hands feel lighter, your shoulders drop slightly. Even your thoughts seem to slow, matching the pace of the flames. This is another quiet truth of long winter nights. Activity does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes slower, more deliberate, shaped by the limits of light and warmth. You do not rush. There is nowhere to rush to. You glance toward the darker edges of the room. They remain still untouched by the firelight. It is easy to imagine them holding onto the cold, waiting just beyond the reach of comfort. That contrast defines the space as much as the fire itself. There is a curious account from one rural diary that mentions how children were often drawn to sit as close to the hearth as possible, sometimes needing to be gently reminded to keep a safe distance. The pull of warmth, especially after time spent in the cold, was difficult to resist. You can understand that now. The fire offers something simple but essential. Not just heat, but a sense of steadiness. A centre point around which the rest of the night can unfold. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth reach you without effort. The flames continue their slow movement, unchanged by your presence. They do not hurry. They do not pause. They simply continue shaping the hours in their own quiet way. And as you sit there watching the light rise and fall, you begin to feel the first true rhythm of the long winter night. It is not marked by clocks or sudden events. It is marked by fire, by warmth, and by the gentle passage of time that follows both. You move closer to the source of warmth, and the shift is gradual but unmistakable. The faint chill that followed you inside begins to loosen, replaced by a gentler heat that gathers around your hands and face first. The hearth comes into clearer view now, its glow steady and low, not bright enough to fill the room, but strong enough to anchor it. The fire does not roar, it breathes. Each small movement of flame curls upward with quiet intention, feeding on the wood that has been placed just so. You can hear it a soft and steady crackle, the kind of sound that settles into the background without ever fully disappearing. In long winter nights like this, the fire is not just warmth. It becomes something closer to a companion, always present, always needing attention. You lower yourself slightly, bringing your hands nearer to the heat. The warmth reaches your fingers, first slow and almost cautious, as if testing whether you're ready to receive it. There is a familiar comfort in this moment, one that people in early 1800s America would have known intimately. A well-documented detail of everyday life during this period is that the hearth served as the central point of the home, especially in winter. Cooking, heating, socializing, and even light all came from this single place. Entire evenings unfolded within its reach. You can see how that would be true now, as everything in the room seems arranged in quiet relation to this fire. You glance upward. The light it casts does not spread evenly. It gathers and fades, creating soft edges and deep shadows. The ceiling beams catch the glow in places while other areas remain dim and undefined. It gives the room a layered feeling, as if parts of it are closer to you than others even when they are not. There's a small detail often overlooked that adds to this scene. Some households would keep a kettle or pot resting near the fire at all times, not just for cooking, but to maintain a steady supply of warm water. It also added moisture to the dry winter air. You might notice such a vessel now quietly doing its work without drawing attention. You shift slightly, letting the warmth reach more of your body. The cold that settled into your clothing begins to lift, though not all at once. It leaves in stages, retreating from your hands, your arms, your shoulders. It reminds you that warmth is not something you simply step into. It is something you return to. A question has long been considered by those who study daily life in this era. Did people feel a deeper connection to fire because of how essential it was? Or did its constant presence make it fade into the background of awareness? As you sit here watching the flames move, it seems possible that both were true. You notice it, and yet you also accept it as part of the rhythm of the night. You look around the room again. Now that your eyes have adjusted, more details emerge. The arrangement of furniture becomes clearer. A chair pulled close to the hearth. Another set slightly farther back, perhaps, for someone who prefers less direct heat. A table within reach, holding small items that might be needed through the evening. Everything suggests intention. Nothing is placed without purpose. There is another subtle observation that adds texture to this moment. In many homes, the fire would be carefully managed to last through the night. Larger logs might be placed in such a way that they burned slowly, providing steady heat rather than quick bursts of flame. It required experience to do this well, a quiet understanding of how wood behaves over time. You watch the fire shift again. A small piece collapses inward, sending a brief flare of light upward before settling back into a steady glow. The sound is soft, but it draws your attention all the same. It reminds you that this warmth is not fixed. It changes moment by moment, shaped by what is added, what is removed, and how it is tended. You lean back slightly, letting the heat settle around you rather than reaching for it. The contrast between outside and inside becomes more distant now, though you can still feel it at the edges of your awareness. The memory of the cold lingers, making the warmth feel more meaningful. There is a quiet rhythm to this space. The fire breathes, the house responds, you sit within it. A lesser discussed detail from this time is that people often use the hearth not just for warmth, but as a place for small ongoing tasks. Items could be dried near the fire, tools warmed before use, even clothing adjusted to remove lingering dampness. The fire was always doing more than one thing at once, supporting life in ways that were both visible and subtle. You extend your hands once more, turning them slightly to warm both sides. The sensation is simple, but it carries a kind of quiet satisfaction. This is not excess comfort. It is just enough. You notice how the light flickers across the room, touching surfaces and then pulling away. It creates a gentle movement that replaces the stillness of the snow outside. Here, nothing is completely still. Everything shifts, even if only slightly. You take a slow breath. The air feels different now. Warmer, yes, but also marked by the presence of the fire. There is a faint scent of burning wood mixed with whatever else the day has left behind. It is not unpleasant. It is familiar. You settle more fully into your place. There is no urgency here. The night stretches ahead long and unbroken, and the fire will continue as long as it is cared for. That perhaps is the quiet lesson of this moment. Warmth does not happen on its own. It is maintained, watched over, and gently guided. You glance at the flames one more time. They move as they always do, rising and falling in a pattern that never quite repeats. You could watch them for a long time without growing restless. Many people did, and as the fire continues its steady work, you begin to understand how it replaces the sun during these long winter nights, not with brightness, but with presence. You remain near the hearth for a while, letting the warmth settle into you, but gradually your attention shifts outward toward the rest of the room, where the firelight begins to fade. It does not disappear entirely. It simply loses strength, becoming thinner, softer, until it gives way to shadow. The darkness inside a home like this is not complete. It is layered. You notice how the edges of objects dissolve first. The corners of the room seem to drift farther away, even though you know they have not moved. The ceiling feels higher, the walls more distant. Light does not reach everything, and what it leaves untouched becomes something you sense more than see. You rise slowly from your seat, stepping just beyond the strongest circle of warmth. Almost immediately the temperature drops a little, and the shadows deepen around you. The floor beneath your feet feels cooler here, as if the fire has no claim over this part of the space. A widely recognized detail from early 19th century households is that artificial lighting was limited, and often rationed carefully. Candles, when available, were not burned freely. They represented time labor and resources, especially when made from animal fat or beeswax. You can imagine someone deciding whether to light one now, weighing the need against the cost, without ever speaking the thought aloud. For the moment, no additional light is added. You move through the dimness, guided by memory as much as sight. Shapes emerge slowly as your eyes adjust. A table reveals itself at the last moment. A wall stands where you expected it to be. Your hand reaches out once or twice, brushing against familiar surfaces, just to confirm their presence. There is something quietly fascinating about how people adapted to this level of darkness. Some accounts suggest that individuals developed a stronger reliance on spatial memory, learning the layout of their homes so well that movement at night became almost instinctive. You can feel the beginnings of that now, even in this brief moment, as your steps become more certain with each movement. You pause near the centre of the room. The firelight reaches you, but only faintly. It casts long, thin shadows that stretch and shift across the floor. Your own shadow follows you, growing larger and smaller, depending on where you stand. It moves in ways that feel slightly unfamiliar, as if it has its own rhythm separate from yours. There is a small, lesser-known habit from this period that adds a quiet layer to the scene. Some families would use simple reflectors, polished metal, or even light-coloured surfaces to extend the reach of candlelight or firelight. It was not perfect, but it allowed a bit more visibility without using additional fuel. You might imagine such a surface somewhere nearby, catching a hint of glow and returning it softly into the room. You consider lighting a candle. The thought comes naturally. More light would make everything easier, more defined. But there is also a certain calm in leaving things as they are. The dimness encourages stillness. It slows your movement, softens your focus, and gently limits what demands your attention. This balance between light and darkness shape the experience of long winter nights in ways that are not always obvious. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about whether limited lighting influenced how people structured their evenings. Did it encourage earlier rest, or did it simply shift activities toward those that required less visibility? Standing here, you might sense that it did a bit of both. You take another step, then another. The room feels different when you're not sitting near the fire. It is quieter in a deeper way. The sounds seem more distant, the warmth less immediate. Even your own breathing feels more noticeable, as if the space has grown more attentive. You reach the far side of the room and turn back. From here, the hearth appears smaller, its glow contained within a gentle circle. It is enough to guide you, but enough to fill the space. Everything beyond it exists in varying shades of shadow. There is a curious detail recorded in a few personal writings from the era. Some individuals describe the patterns of shadow on their walls as something they would watch for long periods, finding shapes and movements within them. It was not quite entertainment, but it offered a quiet way to pass time when the night stretched on. You can understand that now. The shadows shift with the fire, never repeating exactly. A small change in flame creates a new pattern. A movement of your hand alters the scene again. It is subtle, but it holds your attention. You move back toward the hearth, slowly feeling the warmth return with each step. The transition is gentle but noticeable, like re-entering a familiar space after briefly stepping away. As you settle once more within the circle of light, you realize how important this contrast is. The darkness does not simply exist outside the firelight. It defines it. Without shadow, the glow would feel less meaningful. Without dimness, the small pool of light would lose its sense of shelter. Together they shape the atmosphere of the room, guiding how you move, how you see, and even how you think. You lower yourself again, the chair welcoming you back without resistance. The fire continues as it always has, steady and quiet. The shadows respond, stretching and folding along the walls. Nothing here is hurried. Nothing demands urgency. There is only the slow interplay of light and dark. And as the night deepens outside, you begin to understand that these long winter evenings are not defined by brightness, but by how people learn to live comfortably within the dim. You remain seated for a moment, watching the soft reach of the firelight, but soon your attention drifts back to your own body. The warmth has helped. Certainly, yet it has not fully replaced what the cold took from you outside. You become aware of the layers you wear, how they rest against your skin, how they hold what heat they can. You shift slightly in your seat and adjust your sleeves, pulling them closer around your wrists. The motion is small, almost automatic, but it carries a quiet importance. In a winter like this, comfort does not come from a single source. It is built piece by piece, layer by layer. You glance down at your clothing. The fabrics are simple but purposeful. Wool perhaps thick and slightly coarse, chosen not for softness, but for its ability to trap warmth. Linen underneath lighter, creating a barrier between your skin and the heavier outer layers. Each piece serves a role even if it does not announce itself. A commonly accepted detail of daily life in early 19th century America is that people relied heavily on layering to survive the cold. Homes were not evenly heated, and outdoor work often remained necessary, so clothing became a primary defense. You can feel that reality now in the way each layer holds onto a small portion of warmth, combining into something more effective than any single garment. You press your hands briefly against your arms, noticing the retained heat beneath the fabric. It is not dramatic, but it is steady. That steadiness matters. There is a small and often overlooked detail that adds depth to this moment. Some individuals would wear multiple pairs of socks, sometimes mismatched, sometimes patched repeatedly simply to preserve warmth in their feet. It was not uncommon for these layers to be repaired again and again, extending their use far beyond what might seem reasonable today. You might imagine the effort that went into maintaining them, each stitch, a quiet act of preparation for nights like this. You lean forward slightly, bringing your feet closer to the fire. The warmth reaches them, slowly working its way through the fabric. It takes time. Nothing here happens all at once. Even relief arrives gradually, as if it must pass through each layer before reaching you. There is an ongoing line of inquiry among historians about how effective these clothing strategies truly were. Some suggest that people managed to stay relatively comfortable through experience and adaptation. Others point out that discomfort was likely a constant presence, accepted rather than eliminated. As you sit here feeling both the warmth and the lingering chill, it becomes easy to believe that the truth lies somewhere between those views. You adjust your position again, pulling a thicker layer closer around your shoulders. Perhaps a shawl, perhaps a blanket, something that adds another barrier against the cold that still lingers in the room. The weight of it is reassuring. It settles around you in a way that feels protective. The fire continues its quiet work, but it cannot reach everywhere. Your back turned slightly away from the heat feels cooler. The air near the floor remains faintly cold. Even your hands, when you lower them from the fire, begin to lose warmth again after a short while. It is a constant exchange, a balance that never quite settles. You notice how instinctively you respond to this. A small shift here, a slight adjustment there, pulling fabric closer, turning toward the fire, drawing back when the heat grows too strong. These movements are subtle, but they repeat, forming a quiet pattern that shapes how you sit, how you rest, how you exist within the space. There is a curious observation found in some historical accounts. People often slept in multiple layers as well, not just for comfort, but for necessity. Nighttime temperatures could drop significantly even indoors, so clothing was rarely removed entirely. Instead, it became part of the bedding itself, adding to the overall insulation. You glance toward where you might eventually rest. It is not yet time, but the thought lingers. The idea of carrying this warmth with you, of wrapping yourself more fully against the night, feels both practical and calming. You return your attention to the present moment. The firelight continues to flicker, touching the folds of your clothing, highlighting textures you might not notice during the day. The weave of fabric, the worn edges, the places where repairs have been made. Each detail speaks quietly of use of time of care. You run your fingers along the edge of your sleeve, feeling the material beneath your touch. It is not smooth, but it is familiar. It has been worn perhaps many times before, shaped to fit not just your body, but your needs. There is no excess here. Everything you wear has a purpose. You lean back again, letting the layers settle around you. The warmth you have gathered begins to hold not perfectly, but enough to create a sense of steadiness. The cold remains present at the edges, but it no longer presses as strongly. Outside, the night continues without pause. Inside, you remain within this careful balance. There is a quiet understanding that begins to form as you sit there. Surviving long winter nights is not about removing the cold entirely. It is about managing it, working with it, finding ways to soften its impact without expecting it to disappear. You shift your shoulders once more, drawing the fabric closer, then letting your hands rest again near the fire. The movement feels natural now, familiar, and as you settle into that rhythm, you begin to understand how something as simple as clothing, becomes a constant companion through the long, quiet hours of winter. You sit quietly for a while, wrapped in layers and firelight, until your attention begins to drift beyond what you can see. The room remains still, yet something else draws your focus. Not movement, but sound, or rather, the careful absence of it. You listen. At first there is very little. The soft crackle of the fire continues steady and familiar. A faint shift of wood somewhere within the walls. Perhaps the slightest movement from another part of the house. These sounds do not stand apart. They blend together, forming a gentle background that feels almost like a presence. Then slowly you begin to notice what lies beyond. The winter night has its own voice. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. Instead, it reveals itself in small, subtle ways. A low whisper of wind passing along the outside of the house. A soft brushing sound as snow moves across the ground. Occasionally a faint creak as if the structure itself is responding to the cold. A commonly accepted observation from historical records is that wooden houses during this period often produce sounds in winter that people came to recognize over time. As temperatures dropped, materials contracted, creating gentle pops and shifts that could be heard more clearly in the stillness of night. What might seem unsettling at first often became familiar, even comforting. You tilt your head slightly, listening more closely. There is a rhythm to it. The wind rises, then settles. The house responds with a quiet adjustment. The fire answers with its steady crackle. Together these sounds form a kind of conversation, one that unfolds slowly and without urgency. There is an intriguing detail that adds to this soundscape. In some rural areas, people reported being able to hear distant noises more clearly during winter nights than at other times of the year. The cold air combined with the stillness of snow-covered ground allowed sound to travel farther and with less distortion. You might imagine a distant tree shifting under the weight of snow, or the faint call of an animal far beyond the reach of sight. You pause, holding your breath for a moment, and there it is, something faint, almost uncertain, a distant sound that you cannot quite place. It might be nothing. It might be something carried from far away. In a world without constant background noise, even the smallest sound can feel significant. There has been some discussion among scholars about how this heightened awareness of sound influenced daily life. Did it make people more alert, more attuned to their surroundings, or did it simply become part of the environment noticed but not questioned? As you sit, you can feel both possibilities. The sounds draw your attention, yet they do not disturb your calm. You shift slightly in your seat, the fabric of your clothing brushing softly against itself. Even that small sound feels more noticeable now. The quiet amplifies everything, turning minor movements into something more distinct. You listen again to the fire. Its rhythm has become familiar, almost predictable. A soft crackle, a brief pause, another gentle shift. It anchors the room, giving you something steady to return to whenever your attention wanders. There is a lesser-known habit from this time that reflects how important sound could be. Some individuals became skilled at recognizing changes in the fire simply by listening to it. A difference in tone or rhythm could indicate that the wood was burning too quickly or that it needed to be adjusted. It was a subtle skill learned over time through careful attention. You lean back slightly, letting the sound settle around you. The wind outside grows a little stronger for a moment, pressing gently against the walls. The house responds with a soft, almost imperceptible shift. It does not feel threatening. It feels steady, as if the structure understands how to endure this pressure. There is a quiet comfort in that. You realize that these sounds, rather than breaking the silence, actually define it. Without them, the night might feel empty. With them, it feels full in a gentle, understated way. You glance toward the darker parts of the room. They remain still, yet the sounds reach them as well, filling the space evenly. Nothing is entirely separate from this quiet rhythm. Another faint noise drifts in from outside. This time it is a little clearer. Perhaps the distant movement of an animal crossing through the snow. Perhaps the soft fall of snow slipping from a branch. It's impossible to say with certainty, and that uncertainty becomes part of the experience. There is a thoughtful question that has been raised in studies of historical daily life. Did the lack of constant noise make people more imaginative, filling in the gaps with possibilities? Or did it make them more grounded, focused only on what could be confirmed? Sitting here, you might find your mind moving gently between those two states. You return your attention to your own breathing. It feels steady now, matching the slow rhythm of the room. Inhale, exhale. The sound is soft but present. It becomes part of the larger pattern joining the fire, the wind, and the quiet movements of the house. Time passes, though it is difficult to measure. There are no clocks nearby to mark the minutes. Instead, the passage of time is felt through changes in sound. The fire settles slightly. The wind shifts direction. The distant noises come and go. You adjust your position once more, the chair giving a faint creak beneath you. Even that small sound feels significant in this environment. It reminds you that you are part of the space, not separate from it. You listen again. The night continues unchanged in its quiet persistence. And as you sit within it, surrounded by these soft, steady sounds, you begin to understand how the long winter nights were not truly silent. They were simply quieter than anything you're used to. You remain near the hearth, listening to the quiet language of the night until another awareness begins to take shape. It is not as subtle as sound nor as distant as the wind outside. It is closer, more immediate, a slow, steady reminder from within your own body. Hunger, perhaps, or simply the expectation of food at this hour. You glance toward the area where meals are prepared, and though nothing is hurried here, there is a sense that this part of the evening has its own place in the rhythm of winter life. You rise from your seat, moving carefully through the dim light, guided once again by memory and familiarity. The air near the hearth shifts slightly as you approach, carrying a faint scent that had gone unnoticed before. It is simple, not rich or complex, but unmistakable. Something warm, something sustaining. A broadly supported historical understanding tells us that winter meals in early 19th century America were often modest, shaped by what could be preserved and stored through the colder months. Fresh ingredients were rare and variety depended heavily on what had been prepared earlier in the year. You can sense that reality now not as a limitation, but as a quiet framework for how life continues through the season. You pause near the cooking area. A pot rests close to the fire, positioned where it can receive steady heat without being overwhelmed. You lean slightly closer, feeling the warmth rising from it, different from the direct heat of the flames. Softer, more contained. You lift the lid just enough to glimpse inside. Steam rises gently, carrying with it the scent of something slow-cooked. Perhaps a stew made from preserved vegetables and small portions of meat. Perhaps a simple broth stretched to last as long as possible. It is not elaborate, but it is enough. There's a small detail often overlooked that adds depth to this moment. Some households would keep a pot like this going for extended periods, adding small amounts of ingredients over time rather than preparing entirely new meals each day. It allowed them to make the most of limited resources, turning simple ingredients into something that could sustain them through long nights. You lower the lid again, letting the heat remain contained. The act feels careful, deliberate, shaped by the understanding that nothing here is wasted. Every bit of warmth, every portion of food carries value. There is an ongoing line of inquiry among those who study daily life in this era about how people perceived these simple meals. Were they seen as monotonous, or did they provide a kind of steady comfort through their consistency? As you stand here surrounded by the quiet warmth of the hearth, it becomes easy to imagine that familiarity itself offered reassurance. You reach for a small bowl, its surface worn smooth from repeated use. The weight of it in your hands feels balanced, familiar. You ladle a portion from the pot, watching as the contents settle into the bowl with a soft movement. The scent rises again, more noticeable now. It is not overwhelming. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, filling the space gently. You return to your seat near the fire, holding the bowl carefully. The warmth seeps through the material, reaching your hands even before you begin to eat. It is another form of comfort, small but meaningful. You take a slow sip. The taste is simple, but it carries a quiet satisfaction. Warmth spreads from within, complementing the heat of the fire. It is not indulgent, it is sustaining. There is a curious observation recorded in some personal writings from the time. People often described winter meals not in terms of flavour, but in terms of how they made the body feel. Warm, steady enough. Those qualities mattered more than richness or variety. You take another sip slower this time. The rhythm of the evening continues around you. The fire crackles softly. The wind outside moves in gentle patterns. The house settles into its quiet presence. Nothing interrupts the moment. You notice how naturally this act fits into the flow of the night. There is no rush to finish, no urgency to move on to something else. The meal becomes part of the stillness, extending it rather than breaking it. You lower the bowl slightly, letting the warmth linger in your hands. Even the act of holding it feels purposeful. It keeps your fingers from cooling too quickly, adds another layer of comfort to the space between you and the cold. A lesser discussed habit from this period involves how people used food not just for nourishment, but as a way to mark time during long evenings. A small meal, followed by a pause, then perhaps another activity. It created gentle divisions within the night, helping it feel less endless. You finish the last of the broth, setting the bowl aside with care. The warmth remains both in your hands and within you. It does not last forever, but it lingers long enough to matter. You lean back again, returning your attention to the fire. The light flickers softly, unchanged by your brief movement. The room settles once more into its quiet rhythm. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Inside, you remain within this small circle of warmth, sustained not by abundance, but by simple, steady acts that carry you through the long winter night. You set the bowl aside and remain still for a moment, letting the last traces of warmth settle within you. The simple meal does not weigh heavily, yet it leaves behind a quiet sense of steadiness. You notice how quickly that feeling becomes part of the rhythm of the evening, as natural as the fire, as constant as the cold waiting just beyond the walls. Your gaze drifts again toward the hearth, but this time it moves past it toward the edges of the room, where storage quietly shapes survival. You begin to understand that what you have just eaten is only one small part of a much larger effort, one that began long before this night arrived. You rise slowly, guided by curiosity more than need. The light does not follow you easily. It stretches, thins, and then fades as you move away from the fire. Still, your steps are steady now. You have learned the shape of this space, the distance between objects, the way shadows gather in certain corners. You reach a shelf along the wall. Its surface holds a collection of items that might seem unremarkable at first glance, yet each one carries quiet importance. Jars sealed carefully, bundles wrapped in cloth, containers placed just out of direct light as if protecting what lies within. A widely accepted historical detail tells us that preserving food was essential for surviving winter in early 19th century America. Without refrigeration, families relied on methods like salting, drying, smoking, and pickling to extend the life of their supplies. These processes were not optional. They were necessary preparations for nights exactly like this one. You reach for one of the jars, lifting it gently. The glass feels cool beneath your fingers, a contrast to the warmth you left behind. You hold it closer to the faint light, just enough to make out the contents. Perhaps vegetables preserved in brine. Perhaps fruit set aside months ago now, waiting quietly to be used. There is a small, lesser-known detail that adds texture to this moment. Some households would bury certain foods in cool earth or store them in root cellars to maintain a stable temperature. It was not a perfect solution, but it allowed items like potatoes, carrots, and apples to last far longer than they otherwise would. You might imagine those hidden stores now resting beneath the frozen ground, untouched by the night above. You set the jar back in place, careful not to disturb the arrangement. Nothing here is casual. Everything is placed with intention, organized not for convenience alone, but for endurance. Each item represents effort from an earlier season, harvested, prepared, preserved, and now slowly used over time. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how this reliance on preserved food shaped daily life. Some suggest that it created a strong sense of planning and foresight as families had to anticipate their needs months in advance. Others believe it fostered a kind of patience and acceptance of limited variety in exchange for security. As you stand here surrounded by these quiet stores, it is easy to feel both. You move along the shelf, letting your fingers brush lightly against the surfaces. Each container feels different. Some smooth, some rough, some slightly worn from repeated use. These textures tell their own story, one of handling, of care, of time passing slowly. You pause at a bundle wrapped in cloth. It is tied simply but securely. You loosen it just enough to peek inside, revealing something dried. Perhaps strips of meat. Perhaps herbs gathered and set aside. The scent is faint but present, carrying a memory of a different season. You close it again, restoring it to its place. There is a quiet respect in that action, an understanding that these supplies are not to be used without thought. They must last. They must be measured carefully against the length of the winter. You turn back toward the hearth. The light seems stronger now after your time in the shadows, though. You know it has not changed. It is your eyes that have shifted, adapting to the dimness, learning how to move between light and dark without resistance. As you walk back, you become aware of how these preserved foods connect to the meal you just finished. The broth, the vegetables, the small portion of meat. None of it existed in isolation. It all came from this quiet system of storage and preparation. There is an interesting observation found in some historical accounts. People often developed a deep familiarity with their supplies, knowing not just what they had, but how long it might last. This awareness shaped decisions each day, guiding how much to use and when. You return to your seat, settling once more within the circle of warmth. The fire greets you again, its heat steady and patient. You hold your hands near it for a moment, feeling the contrast between the cool storage space and the warmth here. The night continues without pause. Outside the snow deepens. Inside, the careful balance of preservation and use carries on quietly. You lean back slightly, letting the rhythm of the space settle around you once more. The meal has passed, the stores remain, the understanding grows. Surviving these long winter nights is not only about what you do in the moment. It is about everything that was done before, waiting silently on a shelf, ready when you need it. You settle back into the warmth of the hearth once more, yet your thoughts linger on something less visible than food or fire. A quieter need begins to surface, one so ordinary that it is easy to overlook until it becomes difficult to ignore. Water. You glance toward the corner where a bucket or container might rest. And even before you move, you understand that this simple necessity is not as effortless as it might seem. In a winter like this, nothing remains entirely simple for long. You rise again, moving with a slow and steady pace, and approach the container. The air feels cooler here, just beyond the reach of the fire's full warmth. You place a hand against the side of the bucket, and the sensation tells you everything you need to know. Cold. Not just cool, but deeply cold, as if the water within has been holding on to the outside air. A well-established fact about winter life in early 19th century America is that water sources often froze during the coldest months. Wells could ice over. Buckets left too long in unheated spaces might develop a thin layer of ice across the top. Even indoor water, if left unattended, could grow dangerously cold. You lift the lid or peer inside. A faint surface has formed. Not solid all the way through, but enough to resist slightly when touched. You press gently, breaking it with a soft crack that echoes quietly in the still room. Beneath the water remains liquid, though just barely. There is a small but telling detail recorded in some household accounts. People would sometimes keep water containers closer to the hearth during the night, not for comfort, but simply to prevent freezing. It required constant awareness, a small but necessary adjustment in the arrangement of the room. You dip a cup into the water and lift it carefully. The chill reaches your fingers even through the container. You bring it closer, noticing how the air around it seems colder still, as if the water carries a piece of the outside with it. You take a sip. The sensation is immediate and sharp, a contrast to the warmth you've been holding on to. It clears your senses in a way that is both refreshing and slightly jarring. You lower the cup slowly, letting the feeling settle. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people managed daily water needs during prolonged winters. Some suggest that routines became more structured, with water drawn and stored carefully at specific times. Others point out that the unpredictability of freezing conditions meant constant adjustment. Standing here, you can sense how both would be true. You look toward the door again, imagining the effort required to gather fresh water from outside. The path would be slower, now covered in snow. The source, whether a well or stream, might be partially frozen. Each trip would demand time, effort, and a willingness to face the cold once more. There is a lesser-known observation that adds a quiet layer to this moment. In some areas, people would break ice daily just to access water using tools kept specifically for that purpose. It became part of the routine, as ordinary as tending the fire, yet no less demanding. You set the cup aside and move the container slightly closer to the hearth. The motion is small but deliberate. You place it where it can receive just enough warmth to prevent further freezing without risking spillage or overheating. It is a careful balance, like so many things in this space. You return to your seat, noticing how the warmth of the fire feels more pronounced after the cold of the water. The contrast sharpens your awareness, reminding you how closely these elements exist side by side. The fire crackles softly. The house settles. The water rests quietly nearby, holding its place between solid and liquid, shaped by the temperature of the room. You lean back, letting your hands return to the warmth. There is something grounding about this cycle. Heat, cold, warmth again. Each element reinforcing the presence of the others. A curious reflection appears in some personal writings from the time. People often described winter not just as a season, but as a series of small challenges repeated daily. Keeping water from freezing, maintaining the fire, preserving food. None of these tasks were overwhelming on their own, but together they shaped the entire experience of the season. You can feel that now. The act of drinking water, something so simple in other times, carries weight here. It requires attention, effort, and awareness. You glance once more at the container. It sits quietly unchanged for the moment, yet always at risk of shifting with the temperature. It reminds you that even the most basic needs demand care. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, you remain within this careful balance of warmth and cold, effort and rest. And as you settle again into the steady rhythm of the fire, you begin to understand that surviving these long winter nights depends not only on grand preparations, but on the quiet, repeated acts that sustain you moment by moment. You settle back into your place near the fire hands, warming once again when a different kind of presence begins to make itself known. Not the fire, not the wind, not even the quiet creaks of the house. Something softer, subtler, alive in a different way. A faint sound reaches you, a shifting perhaps, the soft brush of movement against wood. You turn your head slightly, eyes adjusting to the dim edges of the room where the firelight begins to fade. There, just beyond the strongest glow, something stirs. An animal. You do not feel surprised. In a winter like this, the boundary between human and animal space was often less fixed than you might expect. A commonly recognized aspect of rural life in early 19th century America is that livestock or smaller animals were sometimes brought closer to the home during harsh weather, especially overnight. It was not only for their survival, but also for practical reasons. Their presence could help conserve warmth, even if only slightly. You watch as the shape becomes clearer. Perhaps a small goat or a dog curled low against the floor, its body tucked tightly to preserve heat. It does not move much, only enough to adjust its position. Its breathing is slow, steady, matching the rhythm of the room. You remain still observing. There is a quiet understanding between you and the animal. No need for sudden movement, no need for sound. It exists here for the same reason you do, to endure the night, There is an interesting lesser-known detail recorded in some accounts from the period. In particularly severe winters, animals were occasionally kept in attached structures, or even within parts of the home itself, especially in smaller dwellings. While it may seem unusual from a modern perspective, the shared warmth could make a measurable difference in survival. You notice how the air near the floor feels slightly different now. Warmer perhaps, though not by much. The presence of another living body adds a subtle layer to the atmosphere, one that blends almost imperceptibly with the heat of the fire. You shift slightly in your seat, careful not to disturb the quiet balance. The animal lifts its head for a moment, sensing your movement, then settles again without concern. There is trust here, or perhaps simply familiarity. This arrangement is not new. It has likely been repeated many nights before. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people perceived this closeness with animals. Some suggest it fostered a practical relationship grounded in necessity rather than sentiment. Others believe that these shared spaces may have created a quieter sense of companionship, even if it was rarely expressed in words. As you sit here, it feels natural, neither unusual nor uncomfortable. You glance toward the hearth again. The fire continues its steady work unchanged by the additional presence in the room. The light reaches the animal only faintly outlining its form rather than revealing it fully. It becomes part of the landscape of the space, another element woven into the night. You lean forward slightly, extending your hands toward the warmth once more. The familiar sensation returns, easing the chill that lingers in your fingers. You notice how the animal remains where it is, choosing its own balance between warmth and distance. Not too close to the fire, not too far from it. There is a quiet intelligence in that choice. A small, almost forgotten observation from the time suggests that animals often found the most efficient places to rest within a shared space, guided by instinct rather than instruction. People in turn learned from this, adjusting their own positions to match what seemed to work best. You watch the slow rise and fall of the animal's breathing. It adds another rhythm to the room, one that blends gently with the others. The fire, the wind, the house, and now this steady living presence. Together they create a layered stillness that feels complete. You shift your weight again, settling deeper into your seat. The night continues to stretch outward, unbroken and calm. Outside, the snow falls without interruption. Inside, warmth is maintained, movement is minimal, and every presence has its place. You glance once more toward the darker corners. They remain unchanged, holding their quiet shadows, yet now they feel less empty. The presence of another living being, even a silent one, alters the space in a subtle but meaningful way. You take a slow breath. The air carries the familiar scent of wood smoke mixed now with something softer. A trace of the animal's presence. It is not unpleasant. It is simply part of the environment, another detail that blends into the whole. A question has quietly lingered in historical study. Did people of this time view such arrangements as purely practical, or did they find a certain comfort in the shared warmth of living beings during long winter nights? Sitting here, you may find yourself leaning toward the latter, even if it was never spoken aloud. You let your hands rest in your lap for a moment, warmth still lingering in your fingers. The animal remains still. The fire continues. The house holds its quiet shape against the cold, and as you sit within this shared space, you begin to understand that survival in these long winter nights was not always solitary. Sometimes it was shared in the simplest, quietest ways. You remain where you are for a while, sharing the quiet space with the steady fire and the soft presence nearby, until your attention begins to shift again. The night is long, and it does not pass on its own. It asks to be filled gently with small and steady actions. You glance toward the table. It sits within reach of the firelight placed there with quiet intention. On its surface, a few items rest, not arranged for display but for use. A piece of fabric, a tool, something simple waiting to be taken up. You lean forward and pick up the cloth. It feels familiar beneath your fingers, worn but sturdy. The edges show signs of use, perhaps a small tear that has been waiting to be mended. You turn it slightly, examining it in the shifting light. A widely acknowledged aspect of winter evenings in early 19th century America is that much of the time indoors was spent on handwork. Sewing, mending, carving, and repairing were not occasional tasks. They were woven into daily life, especially during the colder months when outdoor labour was limited. You reach for a needle and thread. The movement is carefully practiced. Even if your hands are not entirely steady at first, they find their rhythm quickly. The thread passes through the small opening guided by patience more than speed. You begin. The first stitch is slow, then another. The fabric yields gently beneath your fingers, each motion small but purposeful. There is no rush here, no need to finish quickly. The task unfolds at the same pace as the night itself. There is a lesser-known detail that adds depth to this moment. Many garments during this time were repaired repeatedly rather than replaced. A shirt, a pair of socks, or a blanket might be mended again and again, each repair extending its life just a little further. You can see that history in the cloth you hold now, where earlier stitches remain quiet evidence of past care. You continue your work, the needle moving in and out with steady rhythm. The firelight flickers across your hands, sometimes illuminating the thread clearly, sometimes leaving it half in shadow. You adjust slightly, turning the fabric to catch the light more easily. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how people experienced this kind of repetitive work. Some suggest it was simply necessary labour done without much thought. Others believe it offered a form of quiet focus, even a sense of calm, especially during long winter nights. As you sit here, you may feel that calm begin to settle in. Your breathing slows. Your movements become more fluid. The task does not demand your full attention, yet it holds it gently, giving your thoughts a place to rest. You pause for a moment, lifting the fabric closer to inspect your progress. The stitches are not perfect, but they are strong. They will hold. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often measured the passage of evening not by hours, but by tasks completed. A seam finished, a tool repaired, a small project brought to a natural pause. These quiet achievements marked time in a way that felt more tangible than a clock. You return to your work. The needle moves again, steady and sure. The thread follows, binding the fabric together in a simple, effective way. Around you, the room continues its quiet rhythm. The fire crackles softly. The animal nearby shifts slightly, then settles again. The wind brushes against the outside walls, faint and distant. None of it interrupts your work. Instead, it becomes part of it, a steady background that supports the slow movement of your hands. You feel the warmth of the fire on one side of your body, the cooler air on the other. The contrast remains, but it no longer demands attention. It simply exists, part of the balance you have come to accept. You make another stitch, then another. The repetition becomes almost soothing, each motion familiar, each result visible in a small but meaningful way. There is an often overlooked detail that adds a quiet layer to this scene. Some families would gather together during these hours, each person working on their own task, sharing the same space without constant conversation. It created a sense of presence without the need for words. You can imagine that now, even if you sit alone. The chair across from you, the space beside the hearth, each place ready to be filled even if it remains empty tonight. You tie off the thread at last, securing the final stitch. The task is complete. You run your fingers lightly over the repaired section, feeling the difference. It is not new, but it is whole again. You set the fabric aside and lean back slightly. The movement feels earned, a small moment of rest after quiet effort. The night continues unchanged in its steady pace. Outside, the snow deepens. Inside, small tasks like this carry the hours forward, giving shape to time without ever rushing it. You rest your hands in your lap, warmth still lingering in your fingers. And as you sit there, surrounded by firelight and stillness, you begin to understand how these simple acts of making and mending were not just practical. They were part of how people lived through the long winter nights, one careful stitch at a time. You rest your hands for a moment, the completed stitching set aside, and let the quiet return to its fuller shape. The fire continues its steady rhythm, the animal nearby remains still, and the night stretches outward without interruption. Yet something begins to change, not in the space itself, but in how it feels. A voice, soft at first, almost uncertain. You turn your head slightly, listening more carefully. It does not come from outside. It belongs to this space rising gently within it. Perhaps someone nearby has begun to speak, or perhaps it is simply memory taking shape in the stillness. You lean back, allowing the sound to reach you without effort. Storytelling in a time like this is not an event. It does not begin with an announcement. It emerges slowly, as naturally as the firelight filling the quiet with something more than silence. A broadly accepted understanding of winter evenings in early 19th century America is that oral storytelling played a central role in passing time. Without abundant light or constant written entertainment, people shared tales, memories and small observations, allowing conversation to stretch gently across the hours. The voice continues. It does not rise or fall dramatically. It moves at a steady pace shaped by familiarity rather than performance. You do not need to catch every word to feel its presence. The tone itself carries meaning, a calm rhythm that settles into the room. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to listen more fully. The fire crackles softly beneath the voice, adding its own quiet punctuation. The wind outside brushes faintly against the walls, distant enough not to interrupt. The animal shifts, once then stills again, as if it too has settled into the sound. There is a small, often overlooked detail that adds depth to this moment. Many stories told during this period were not written down. They change slightly with each telling, shaped by memory and the person speaking. A tale might carry the same core, but its edges would shift, adapting to the moment. You open your eyes again, letting the dim light return. The room feels different now, not brighter, but fuller. The presence of a voice alters the space in a subtle but unmistakable way. It connects one moment to the next, bridging the long stretch of night with something shared. You listen more closely. The story itself is simple. Perhaps a memory of a journey. Perhaps a small incident from years before. It does not need to be dramatic. Its purpose is not to impress, but to continue to carry the evening forward in a gentle, unbroken line. There has been thoughtful consideration among historians about how these storytelling traditions influence memory and community. Some suggest they strengthen shared identity, allowing knowledge and experience to pass from one person to another. Others believe they offered a quiet form of comfort, especially during long isolating winters. As you listen, both possibilities feel present. You shift slightly in your seat, careful not to disturb the calm. Your body has grown accustomed to the warmth near the fire, and now your mind begins to follow the rhythm of the voice. The pace is unhurried. There are pauses not empty but full of quiet presence. You notice how easily your thoughts begin to drift alongside the words. You do not need to hold on to every detail. The story does not demand that. It allows you to move in and out of attention, to listen, then reflect, then listen again. There is a curious detail found in some personal accounts from the time. People often remembered the feeling of a story more than its exact content. The tone, the atmosphere, the sense of being together in a quiet space. These elements stayed with them long after the words themselves faded. You let your gaze soften, resting somewhere near the fire. The flames continue their slow movement, unaffected by the voice, yet somehow in harmony with it. Light and sound blend together, creating a layered stillness that feels complete. The story continues. It moves through its moments without urgency, guided by memory rather than structure. There is no need for a clear beginning or a defined end. It simply exists, filling the time it is given. You feel your breathing slow again, matching the pace of the voice. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm becomes part of you, as natural as the warmth against your skin. A quiet question has been raised in studies of daily life during this era. Did these shared moments of storytelling help people endure the length of winter nights, or did they simply make the time feel more meaningful? Sitting here, you may find that the distinction doesn't matter. Both feel true. The voice softens slightly, as if nearing a natural pause. Not an ending, but a resting point. You remain still, allowing the last words to settle into the space. The fire crackles, the wind brushes the walls, the animal breathes quietly, and the room returns gently to its deeper silence. Yet it is not the same silence as before. It carries something now, a trace of the story lingering in the air. You rest your hands in your lap, feeling the warmth, the stillness, and the quiet connection that has passed through the room. And as the night continues, you begin to understand that these long winter evenings were not only about enduring the cold, they were also about sharing moments like this where a simple voice could fill the darkness with something steady and human. The quiet settles again after the last trace of the story fades, but it does not return to the same stillness you knew before. Something lingers, not quite sound, not quite thought, but a gentle awareness of space and distance. You sit for a moment longer, then your attention drifts outward once more beyond the walls, beyond the firelight. You think of the world outside, not just the snow or the cold, but the distance. It stretches farther in winter. You rise slowly, drawn by a quiet curiosity, and make your way toward the door. The air cools as you move away from the hearth, reminding you that warmth is always local, always limited. When you reach the door, you pause, resting your hand lightly against the wood. You do not open it. You simply stand there aware of what lies beyond. A well-documented aspect of life in early 19th century America is that winter often isolated communities for long stretches of time. Snow-covered roads, frozen paths, and harsh conditions made travel difficult, sometimes impossible for days or even weeks. What might be a short journey in warmer months could become a distant thought in winter. You can feel that separation now. Even without stepping outside, you sense how far away everything else has become. Neighbours, towns, roads. They exist, but not in any immediate way. The world has drawn inward, leaving you within a smaller circle. There is a subtle detail that adds depth to this feeling. In some regions, paths that were well known in other seasons became nearly invisible under snow. Without clear markers, even familiar routes could feel uncertain. People relied on memory landmarks and careful observation to navigate, and sometimes chose not to travel at all unless necessary. You lower your hand from the door and turn back toward the room. The firelight greets you again, steady and unchanged. The space feels smaller now, but also more defined. It is not just where you are, it is where you remain. You return to your seat, moving slowly, letting the warmth gather around you once more. There has been considerable reflection among historians on how this seasonal isolation shaped daily life. Some suggest it strengthened household bonds as families spent more time together within shared spaces. Others propose that it could lead to a deeper sense of solitude, especially for those living in more remote areas. As you sit here, you may sense both possibilities existing side by side. You glance toward the darker corners of the room. They hold their quiet presence unchanged. Yet now they feel less like empty space, and more like part of a boundary, a gentle limit to how far your world extends tonight. You take a slow breath. The air carries the familiar scent of wood smoke, steady and grounding. It reminds you that even as the outside world feels distant, the immediate space remains constant. There is an interesting observation found in some personal accounts from the period. People often became more attuned to their immediate surroundings during winter, noticing details they might overlook at other times of the year. The texture of wood, the pattern of light, the small sounds within the home. When the outside world grew less accessible, the inside world gained quiet significance. You shift slightly in your seat, adjusting your position near the fire. The warmth settles around you again, easing the coolness that followed you from the door. The contrast feels sharper now, more defined. Outside is distance, cold and silence. Inside is warmth, light and presence. You lean back, letting your shoulders rest. The night continues unbroken and steady. You think briefly of others, not in a specific way, but as a quiet awareness. Other homes, perhaps not far away in distance, yet separated by the conditions of the season. Each one holding its own fire, its own quiet rhythm, its own small world within the larger stillness. A lesser-known detail from this time suggests that people sometimes mark their presence to distant neighbours through small signals. A light in a window, a trail kept clear, a sign that someone remained there. It was not communication in the usual sense, but it offered reassurance in a season defined by separation. You glance toward the window, though little can be seen beyond it. Perhaps a faint reflection of the fire, perhaps only darkness. Still the thought remains. You're not entirely alone in this winter night, even if you cannot see beyond your immediate space. There is a quiet question that has been explored in historical studies. Did these long periods of isolation deepen a sense of independence, or did they highlight the importance of connection more strongly? Sitting here, you may feel that both are true, each shaping the experience in its own way. You let the thought drift away. There is no need to hold on to it. The fire continues its steady movement. The house remains firm against the cold. The animal nearby rests without disturbance. And you sit within this small defined world, aware of its limits, yet also its quiet completeness. The long winter night stretches outward, carrying distance with it. But here within the reach of firelight you remain grounded, held in place by warmth, memory, and the simple presence of the space around you. You sit quietly for a while, letting that sense of distance settle into something softer, until your thoughts turn to something more specific. Not the broad world beyond the snow, but the quieter thread that once connected you to it more directly. News, a letter perhaps, a message carried from one place to another. You glance toward a small surface nearby where such things might be kept. A folded piece of paper worn at the edges, resting in a place that suggests it has been handled before. You reach for it slowly, lifting it into the firelight. The paper feels fragile, lighter than you expect. You unfold it carefully. The writing, if it is there, appears faint in the dim light. You tilt the page slightly, catching the glow just enough to make out the lines. Words arranged with care, shaped by a hand that took time to form each letter. A widely recognized detail of life in early 19th century America is that communication across distance relied heavily on physical delivery. Letters traveled by horseback carriage or on foot, often taking days or weeks to arrive depending on conditions. In winter, those journeys became slower, more uncertain. You hold the page steady, reading. The content is simple. Perhaps news of family, perhaps a brief account of daily life somewhere else. It does not need to be long to carry meaning. Each word represents effort, distance, and time. There is a subtle detail that adds quiet depth to this moment. Ink itself could behave differently in cold conditions. It might thicken flow less easily, making writing more difficult. Even the act of composing a letter required patience during winter months. You trace one line with your eyes, then another. The words do not feel immediate. They belong to a different moment, a different place. Yet they arrive here, carried across distance, held now in your hands. There has been thoughtful examination among historians about how people experience this delay in communication. Some suggest it created a slower, more reflective exchange, where messages were composed with greater care. Others believe it could heighten feelings of uncertainty as news took time to travel. As you read, you may sense both aspects quietly present. You lower the letter slightly, letting your hands rest. The firelight flickers across the page, shifting the visibility of the words. It reminds you that even reading here is shaped by the environment. Light is not constant. It must be followed, adjusted to. You fold the paper again, slowly returning it to its place. The action feels deliberate, respectful. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. Letters were often read more than once, not just for information, but for connection. In the absence of frequent contact, each message carried a lasting presence, something to return to during long evenings. You sit back, letting your hands rest in your lap. The idea of waiting comes into clearer focus now. Not just waiting for morning, but waiting for news, for contact, for signs of life beyond your immediate space. You glance toward the door again, though you do not rise this time. The path beyond remains quiet, covered in snow, stretching toward places you cannot reach tonight. Somewhere along that path, a message once travelled slowly, carefully, until it arrived here. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. In some rural areas, winter mail delivery could be irregular, sometimes halted entirely during severe conditions. People adapted to this uncertainty, learning to live without immediate updates, trusting that news would arrive when it could. You lean slightly closer to the fire. The warmth steadies you, grounding you in the present moment. The letter now set aside becomes part of the space, a quiet reminder rather than an active focus. You listen again. The fire continues its gentle rhythm. The house holds its shape. The animal breathes softly nearby. Nothing has changed, yet the sense of connection has shifted. You are here in this room within this small circle of light. Beyond it, the world continues slower, quieter, shaped by distance and time. There is a quiet question that has been considered in studies of historical communication. Did the delay between sending and receiving messages make connections feel more distant, or did it deepen their value? Sitting here, you may feel that the waiting itself adds weight to each word, making it more than just information. You let that thought settle. There is no need to resolve it. The night stretches on steady and unbroken. You remain within it, surrounded by warmth, shadow, and the quiet traces of connection that reach you even across distance. And as you sit there, you begin to understand that in these long winter nights, communication was not immediate. It was patient, carried slowly across snow and silence, arriving gently and staying long after it had been read. You sit with the memory of the letter for a while, letting its quiet presence fade back into the room when another awareness begins to rise. It is not tied to distance or sound this time. It is closer, more physical. A small shift in how your body feels as the night deepens, a heaviness perhaps, or a subtle discomfort that you had not noticed before. You adjust your position in the chair, rolling your shoulders slightly, then letting them settle again. The warmth of the fire still reaches you, but it does not erase everything. There is a lingering sense that the body, like the house, must endure the winter rather than escape it. A widely accepted detail from historical accounts is that illness often became more common during the colder months in early 19th century America. The combination of close indoor living, limited ventilation, and weakened bodies created conditions where sickness could spread more easily. You become aware of your breathing. It remains steady, but you notice the dryness in the air, the faint irritation at the back of your throat. It is not severe, only present, a reminder that the environment shapes not just comfort but health as well. You lift a hand, briefly pressing it against your chest, then letting it fall again. The sensation passes, but it leaves behind a quiet awareness. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. In many homes, the same fire that provided warmth also contributed to the air becoming dry and filled with smoke. Ventilation was limited, and while it kept the cold out, it also allowed certain conditions to linger within the space. You glance toward the darker corners of the room. They remain still, yet you imagine how easily illness might move through such a space. A cough here, a fever there. Small signs that could grow over time if not carefully managed. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people understood illness during this period. Some suggest that knowledge was shaped largely by observation and tradition rather than scientific certainty. Others note that practical experience played a strong role in recognizing patterns and responses. As you sit here, you may sense how both ideas would coexist. You shift again, pulling your clothing slightly closer around you. The warmth helps, but it is not complete. The body continues to adjust, responding to the environment in quiet ways. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often described winter illnesses not as sudden events, but as gradual changes. A chill that lingered longer than expected. A cough that returned night after night. These small signs were watched carefully, even if they were not always fully understood. You take a slow breath, then another. The air feels steady, though not entirely comfortable. It carries the scent of the fire mixed with the faint trace of everything that has passed through the room. It is familiar, but not entirely clean. You lean slightly forward, bringing your hands closer to the heat once more. The warmth reaches you, easing some of the tension in your body. It is not a cure, but it offers relief, a momentary balance. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. Some households would adjust their routines during winter evenings to reduce strain on the body, more rest, less exposure to the cold. Small changes meant to preserve strength through the season. You consider that now. The way you sit, the way you move, the pace you keep. Everything becomes part of maintaining balance. You glance briefly toward the place where you might sleep later. The thought carries a quiet significance. Rest is not just comfort here. It is part of staying well, part of enduring the long stretch of winter nights. A question has been quietly explored in historical study. Did people of this time accept illness as an unavoidable part of winter, or did they actively seek ways to prevent it with the knowledge they had? Sitting here, you may feel that both responses existed shaped by circumstance and experience. You let your shoulders relax again, settling into the chair. The fire continues its steady movement. The house holds its quiet form. The night stretches on unchanged. You notice how your body responds to this stillness. The earlier tension fades slightly, replaced by a calmer awareness. You're not entirely comfortable, but you are stable. And in a season like this, stability matters. You rest your hands in your lap, feeling the warmth slowly return to your fingers. The air remains as it is, dry, slightly heavy-shaped by the fire and the closed space. Outside, the cold continues its quiet work. Inside, you remain adjusting, adapting, finding small ways to maintain balance. And as the night deepens, you begin to understand that these long winter evenings were not only about warmth and survival, they were also about listening to the body, noticing its changes and responding with care even when the answers were not always clear. You remain seated for a while, aware now of your body in a quieter, more attentive way. The slight dryness in the air, the lingering warmth near the fire, the way your breathing has settled into a slow and steady rhythm. Nothing feels urgent, yet everything feels worth noticing. Your gaze drifts toward a small surface nearby where a few items rest together, not arranged for display but kept within easy reach. A bundle of dried leaves, a small container, perhaps a cup that has seen frequent use. These are not random objects. They belong to a quiet system of care. You lean forward and pick up one of them. The bundle feels light in your hand. When you bring it closer, a faint scent rises, subtle but distinct. Something earthy. Something that carries a memory of warmer seasons when these plants were gathered and prepared. A widely recognized aspect of life in early 19th century America is that people relied heavily on home remedies and traditional practices to address illness. Without access to modern medicine, families used herbs, teas, and simple treatments passed down through generations. These methods varied from place to place, shaped by local knowledge and experience. You turn the bundle, slightly examining it in the firelight. The leaves are dry, fragile, yet carefully preserved. Each one was chosen, gathered at the right time, then set aside for moments like this. You can imagine the effort behind it, the quiet planning that began long before winter arrived. There is a small detail that often goes unnoticed. Some remedies were not only used for treating illness, but also for maintaining comfort during the colder months. Herbal infusions could warm the body, soothe the throat, or simply provide a sense of ease during long evenings. You place the leaves into the cup and reach for a bit of warm water from the hearth. The motion is slow and deliberate. You pour carefully, watching as the liquid darkens slightly, releasing a faint aroma into the air. It is not strong, but it is present, blending gently with the scent of the fire. You hold the cup in your hands. The warmth seeps through, steady and comforting. You do not drink immediately. You let it rest, allowing the contents to settle, the scent to deepen. There has been ongoing reflection among historians about how effective these traditional remedies truly were. Some suggest that certain treatments had genuine benefits, while others may have offered comfort more than cure. As you sit here, you may sense that both possibilities exist, each carrying its own kind of value. You lift the cup slowly and take a small sip. The taste is mild, slightly bitter, yet not unpleasant. It spreads warmth through your chest, softer than the heat of the fire, but more internal, more lasting. You lower the cup again, holding it close. There is a quiet reassurance in this act. Not because it guarantees anything, but because it represents care, attention, an effort to maintain balance in a season that constantly challenges it. A lesser-known observation from historical accounts notes that some remedies were tied as much to routine as to need. A warm drink before rest, a certain preparation at the first sign of discomfort. These habits created a sense of structure even when their effects were uncertain. You take another sip slower this time. The warmth lingers longer now, settling into you in a way that feels steady. It does not replace the fire, but it complements it, adding another layer to the comfort of the room. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The cup remains in your hands, its heat gradually fading, though not entirely. You notice how naturally you adjust your grip, turning it slightly to keep the warmth where you need it most. There is a thoughtful question that has been raised in studies of daily life during this period. Did these remedies provide a sense of control in an environment that often felt uncertain, or were they simply part of a broader tradition followed without question? Sitting here, you may feel that they offered both a practical response and a quiet sense of reassurance. You glance toward the fire again. Its light continues to move gently across the room, unchanged by your actions. The animal nearby remains still, breathing softly. The house holds its quiet form against the cold. You take one final sip and set the cup aside. The warmth remains not as strong as before, but present enough to be felt. It becomes part of the balance you maintain along with the fire, your clothing, and the careful arrangement of the space. You rest your hands in your lap once more. The night continues its slow passage. Outside, the snow deepens. Inside, small acts of care like this shape the experience of the evening, offering moments of steadiness within the larger stillness. And as you sit there, feeling the lingering warmth within you, you begin to understand that in these long winter nights, comfort was not found in a single solution. It was built gently through simple actions, repeated with quiet intention. You set the cup aside and rest your hands once more, letting the warmth within you settle into something steady and quiet. The room feels unchanged, yet your awareness shifts again, moving toward another presence that shapes the night in its own way. Children. You do not hear them at first. The house remains calm, the fire steady, the wind distant. But then somewhere beyond the immediate circle of light there is a softer sound, a small movement, the faint rustle of fabric, a whisper of breath that carries a different rhythm. You turn your head slightly. In the dimness, shapes begin to form. Smaller forms, perhaps resting close together, wrapped in blankets, positioned where the warmth can reach them just enough. They are not fully awake, not fully asleep, existing in that quiet space between. A widely recognized aspect of life in early 19th century America is that children shared the same living spaces as adults, especially during winter nights. Separate heated rooms were rare, and families often gathered together in a single area to conserve warmth. You can see how that would be true here, where the fire's reach defines where people rest. You watch quietly. One of them shifts slightly, turning toward the warmth. Another pulls a covering closer, seeking comfort without fully waking. The movements are small, instinctive, guided by the body rather than thought. There is a small and often overlooked detail that adds depth to this scene. Children in this period were accustomed to conditions that might feel challenging today. They adapted to cooler indoor temperatures, shared bedding, and limited space, learning from an early age how to exist within these environments. You remain still careful not to disturb the quiet. The presence of children changes the atmosphere in a subtle way. It softens it. The space feels more layered, more alive, even in stillness. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how childhood was experienced during this time, particularly in harsher seasons. Some suggest that children were expected to adapt quickly to the demands of daily life, taking on responsibilities early. Others believe that moments like these, quiet and protected, offered a different kind of experience, one of closeness and shared presence. As you observe, both possibilities feel close. You lean slightly forward, resting your arms gently. The firelight reaches just enough to outline the shapes before you. It does not reveal details, but it provides enough to sense their presence clearly. A faint sound emerges, a murmur perhaps, a half-formed word spoken without waking. It fades quickly, leaving the quiet intact. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. Parents often described how children's sleep during winter nights was shaped by the environment around them. The warmth of the fire, the sounds of the house, the closeness of others. These elements created a kind of shared rhythm that guided rest. You notice how that rhythm feels now. The fire crackles softly. The wind brushes the walls. The breathing of those nearby rises and falls in a gentle pattern. You become aware of how naturally your own breathing begins to match it. Inhale, exhale, slow and steady. There's a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this moment. In some households, children would fall asleep in one place and be moved later in the night, carried carefully to another spot once the fire was reduced or the space shifted. It required quiet attention, a familiarity with the patterns of sleep and movement. You imagine that now the careful lift, the slow step, the effort not to disturb. The room holds that possibility within it, even if it does not happen tonight. You sit back slightly, letting the warmth reach you again. The presence of children does not demand action. It simply exists, shaping the space in a gentle way. You glance toward the darker corners once more. They remain unchanged, yet they feel less distant now. The room feels fuller, more contained, as if everything within it belongs together. A quiet question has been considered in studies of family life during this period. Did these shared spaces create stronger bonds through constant proximity, or did they simply reflect the practical realities of the time? Sitting here, you may feel that both are true, each shaping the experience in subtle ways. You let your gaze soften, resting somewhere between the fire and the shapes beyond it. The night continues without interruption. Outside, the snow falls in steady silence. Inside, warmth, rest, and quiet presence define the space. You remain where you are aware of the small movements, the soft sounds, the gentle rhythm that holds everything together. And as you sit within it, you begin to understand that long winter's nights were not only endured, they were shared, in stillness, in warmth, in the quiet presence of those who rested beside you. You remain still, letting the quiet presence of those around you settle into the rhythm of the room until your awareness begins to shift once more. This time it is not towards sound or movement, but towards something slower, something that shapes the entire night without being seen directly. Sleep, or rather the way it comes and goes in a time like this. You lean back slightly in your seat, feeling the weight of the evening begin to gather. Not exhaustion exactly, but a gentle pull, the kind that suggests rest is near, though not immediate. You close your eyes for a moment, not to drift away fully, but to feel the transition. The warmth of the fire against your face, the cooler air along your back, the steady rhythm of breathing, both yours and those nearby. It all creates a space where sleep feels close, yet not quite settled. A widely accepted observation from historical studies suggests that sleep patterns in pre-industrial societies often differed from what we expect today. Many people experienced what is sometimes called segmented sleep, resting in two distinct periods rather than one continuous stretch. The long winter nights especially seem to encourage this pattern. You open your eyes again, letting the dim light return. The idea feels natural here. There is no clear signal that it's time to sleep all at once. Instead, rest approaches gradually, shaped by the environment rather than the clock. You shift slightly in your seat, adjusting your position. Your body responds with a quiet release, the earlier tension easing further. The warmth of the fire has done its work, not completely removing the chill, but softening it enough to allow stillness to settle in. There is a small and often overlooked detail that adds depth to this moment. Some people during this period would wake during the night between sleep periods, using that time for quiet activities such as reflection prayer or simple tasks. It was not seen as unusual. It was part of the rhythm of the night. You imagine that now, the room much as it is, but quieter still, the fire lower, the shadows deeper, a brief waking, not disruptive but expected. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how widespread this pattern truly was. Some believe it was common across many regions, shaped by natural light and seasonal changes. Others suggest it varied more widely depending on individual circumstances. As you sit here, you may sense how easily such a rhythm could form in a night like this. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. Your body begins to follow that pattern more closely, each breath longer than the last. The sounds of the room continue, but they feel more distant now, as if they are moving slightly farther away. You glance toward the shapes resting nearby. They remain still, breathing softly, already deeper in their own rest. Their presence reinforces the sense that the night is moving towards sleep, even if not all at once. You shift again, this time leaning slightly forward, then back, finding a position that feels more settled. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often describe this early stage of rest as a kind of quiet drifting where thoughts would slow but not disappear. The mind remained aware yet unburdened. You can feel that now. Your thoughts move more slowly, less sharply. They come and go without effort, leaving behind a sense of calm. The fire continues its steady motion. The light flickers softly across the room. The wind outside remains distant, its presence barely noticeable now. You allow your eyes to close again just for a moment longer. There is no urgency to stay awake, yet no immediate need to sleep. You exist in the space between where the body prepares itself gently. A lesser-known detail from this time suggests that bedding arrangements often supported this kind of flexible rest. People might sit doze-wake and then move more fully into sleep, later adjusting their position as the night progressed. You open your eyes once more, though more slowly this time. The room looks the same, yet it feels quieter, as if it has settled more deeply into itself. You rest your hands in your lap, no longer seeking the fire as actively as before. The warmth remains, but your awareness of it softens. There is a quiet question that has been considered in historical study. Did this slower, more flexible approach to sleep create a deeper sense of rest, or was it simply a response to environmental conditions? Sitting here, you may feel that it offers something different from what you expect, not better or worse, but shaped by the rhythm of the night itself. You lean back slightly, letting your body rest fully against the chair. The pull of sleep grows a little stronger now, though still gentle. The night continues, unbroken, steady. You remain within it, drifting slowly toward rest, guided not by time, but by the quiet signals of your body and the calm presence of the space around you. And as you sit there balanced between waking and sleep, you begin to understand that in these long winter nights, rest was not a single moment. It was a gradual unfolding shaped by warmth, darkness, and the steady passage of time. You rest in that quiet space between waking and sleep for a while, letting your body drift gently without fully letting go. The warmth of the fire lingers, though it feels softer now, less immediate. Time passes in a way that is difficult to measure, marked only by subtle changes in light and sound. At some point something shifts. Not sharply, not enough to startle you, but enough to draw you back into clearer awareness. The fire. You open your eyes slowly and look toward the hearth. The flames are lower now, no longer reaching upward with the same quiet strength. Instead, they move closer to the wood, their light dimmer, their motion slower. You sit up slightly. There is an understanding that comes with this moment, one that requires no words. The fire does not maintain itself. It must be watched, adjusted, supported, even in the middle of the night. A commonly observed aspect of winter life in early 19th century America is that maintaining the fire through the night was an ongoing responsibility. Letting it go out entirely could mean waking to a space that had lost its warmth, making the early hours far more difficult. You shift forward, placing your feet carefully on the floor. The boards feel cooler now, a reminder that the warmth in the room has begun to fade along with the fire. You move slowly toward the hearth, your steps quiet, measured. The air near the fire is still warmer than the rest of the room, but the difference is less pronounced than before. You kneel slightly, reaching toward the wood. There is a small detail often unnoticed that adds depth to this task. People who tended fires regularly developed a quiet sense of how much fuel was needed at different times of night. Not too much, which could waste resources. Not too little, which might allow the fire to fade too quickly. You select a piece of wood and place it carefully among the embers. For a moment nothing happens. Then slowly the flame responds. A small flicker grows, catching along the edge of the wood. It spreads gently, feeding on what remains, building back into something more steady. You watch it closely. There is no rush in this process. It unfolds at its own pace, shaped by the careful balance of heat, air, and material. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how such routines shaped daily awareness. Some suggest that people became highly attuned to these small shifts, noticing changes that might go unremarked today. Others believe it was simply part of the rhythm, performed without much conscious thought. As you kneel here, you may feel both the attention and the familiarity in the act. You adjust the wood slightly, ensuring it rests where it can burn evenly. The flame strengthens, not dramatically, but enough to restore a steadier glow. The light spreads outward again, pushing back the deeper shadows that had begun to gather. You remain there for a moment longer, watching. The fire settles into its renewed rhythm, the crackle returning, the warmth beginning to build again. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often describe these brief moments of waking as quiet interruptions, not unwelcome but expected. A pause in rest, a small task completed, then a return to stillness. You rise slowly, the movement careful, unhurried. The room feels slightly warmer already, though not as it was before. It will take time for the heat to spread again, for the balance to be restored. You return to your seat, lowering yourself back into place. The chair creaks softly beneath you, the sound blending into the steady rhythm of the room. You glance toward the shapes resting nearby. They remain undisturbed, their breathing slow and even. The brief movement has not altered their rest. A lesser-known detail from historical accounts notes that not everyone woke for these moments. Sometimes one person in the household would tend the fire, while others slept, sharing the responsibility across nights, or simply responding as needed. You lean back again, letting your body settle. The warmth begins to return, gradually reaching you in slow waves. Your hands move closer to the fire without conscious thought, drawn by the familiar need. There is a quiet question that has been explored in studies of sleep and daily life during this period. Did these interruptions reduce rest, or did they become part of a natural rhythm that people adapted to over time? Sitting here, you may feel that the interruption is gentle enough to blend into the night rather than disrupt it. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The fire continues its steady motion. The house remains firm. The wind outside brushes faintly against the walls. You allow your eyes to soften once more. The brief task is complete. The balance has been restored. The night continues unbroken in its quiet persistence. And as you drift again toward rest, you begin to understand that even in sleep, these long winter nights required attention. Small moments of waking, simple acts of care, all part of enduring the hours until morning. You settle back into your seat after tending the fire, and for a while everything returns to its slow and steady rhythm. The warmth begins to build again, the light stretches a little farther across the room, and the quiet resumes its layered calm. But not all nights remain so gentle. At first it is only a slight change, a faint pressure against the walls, a shift in the air that feels different from before. You do not notice it immediately, but slowly it becomes clearer. The wind is strengthening. You lift your head slightly, listening. The soft brushing sound from earlier grows more defined, more persistent. It moves along the outside of the house with a steadier force, no longer a passing presence, but something that remains. A well-documented aspect of winter in early 19th century America is that storms could arrive suddenly and intensify quickly. Snow and wind together created conditions that tested both the structure of homes and the patience of those inside them. You sit still, letting the sound unfold. The wind presses again, this time more firmly. The walls respond with a faint creak, a subtle shift that reminds you of the house's place within the landscape. It is not separate from the storm, it endures it. You glance toward the door, then toward the window. There is little to see, only darkness and the suggestion of movement beyond it. Yet the sound carries enough information on its own. The storm is building. There is a small but telling detail that adds depth to this moment. Many homes during this period were constructed with materials that allowed for slight movement under pressure. Wood could flex, joints could shift. It was not a flaw but a necessary adaptation to changing conditions. You pull your clothing a little closer around you, responding without thinking. The temperature in the room has not changed significantly yet. The presence of the wind alters how it feels. The warmth seems more precious, more contained, as if it must hold its ground against what presses from outside. There has been considerable discussion among historians about how people experience these storms. Some accounts describe them as deeply unsettling, especially during long nights when visibility was limited. Others suggest that familiarity reduced fear, turning the experience into something expected rather than alarming. As you sit here, you may feel both a quiet awareness and a steady calm. The wind rises again. This time it carries a faint rattle, perhaps from something outside shifting under its force. A loose branch, snow sliding against the structure. The sound is brief but noticeable. You remain still. There is no immediate action to take. The house stands as it should. The fire continues to burn. The space inside remains intact, a lesser-known observation from the time notes that people often listened carefully during storms, not out of fear alone, but as a way of understanding their surroundings. Changes in sound could indicate changes in conditions, offering small clues about what was happening beyond the walls. You listen now in that same way. The wind has a pattern. It rises, holds, then eases slightly before building again. Each movement carries a different tone, a different pressure. The house responds with quiet consistency. A soft creak here, a faint shift there. Nothing sudden, nothing alarming. You lean back slightly, letting your body settle despite the changing sounds. The fire remains your point of focus, its steady crackle unchanged by the storm. It offers a contrast, a reminder that not everything shifts with the wind. There is a curious detail found in some personal writings from the period. People often describe storms as moments when the outside world became more distant than ever, even as its presence felt stronger. The sound of the wind filled the space, yet the ability to move beyond the home was completely removed. You can feel that now. The outside is close in sound, yet unreachable in every other way. You glance once more toward the darker edges of the room. They remain steady, unchanged by what happens beyond the walls. The shapes of furniture, the presence of those resting nearby, the quiet warmth of the fire. All of it continues as before. There is a thoughtful question that has been explored in historical study. Did these storms deepen a sense of vulnerability, or did they reinforce the feeling of shelter within the home? Sitting here, you may sense that both exist together, each shaping the experience in its own way. The wind begins to ease slightly, not completely but enough to soften its edge. The pressure against the walls lessens. The sounds grow quieter, returning gradually to the gentler rhythm you knew earlier. You take a slow breath. The room feels steady again. The fire continues its quiet work. The house remains firm. Outside, the storm moves on, leaving behind only the memory of its passing. You settle deeper into your seat, letting the calm return fully. And as the night continues, you begin to understand that these long winter evenings were not always still. Sometimes they carried moments of movement and sound that reminded you of the world beyond your walls, but through it all the rhythm of the night endured. The wind fades into a gentler presence, and the house settles once more into its steady quiet. You remain seated, letting the calm return fully until you notice something else that has changed, not in the room itself, but in the way time feels. It is stretched, not in a dramatic sense, but in a slow, almost unnoticed way. The night seems longer now, its hours repeating in a pattern that feels both familiar and endless. You glance toward the fire. It burns steadily again, but its light carries a softer tone as if it too has settled into the deeper part of the night. The earlier activity, the small movements, the shifting attention all begin to blend together into something more continuous. You lean back slightly, letting your body rest. There is no clear moment to mark how much time has passed, no clock to measure it. Instead, you feel it in the repetition of small things, the fire being tended, the warmth rising and falling, the quiet breathing of those nearby. A commonly recognized aspect of winter life in early 19th century America is that long stretches of snowbound conditions could slow daily routines significantly. Travel became limited, outdoor work reduced, and time indoors expanded. Days and nights often followed similar patterns, creating a sense of repetition. You can feel that repetition now even within a single night. The moments begin to echo one another, sitting, listening, adjusting, resting. Each one flows into the next without sharp distinction. There is a small detail that adds depth to this experience. In some rural areas, heavy snowfall could block paths entirely, leaving households isolated for extended periods. During those times, routines became even more contained, shaped almost entirely by the interior space. You shift slightly in your seat, the movement slow and unhurried. The room remains unchanged, yet your awareness of it feels different, more settled, less focused on individual details and more attuned to the overall rhythm. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how this kind of repetition influenced people's perception of time. Some suggest that it made days feel longer as fewer distinct events mark their passage. Others believe it created a calming predictability where each moment felt part of a steady flow. As you sit here, you may sense both impressions at once. You glance toward the darker corners of the room. They remain still, holding their quiet presence. The firelight reaches them only faintly, just enough to remind you of their shape without revealing much. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm feels natural now, almost automatic. A lesser-known observation from the time notes that people often structured their evenings around small repeated actions to give shape to the hours. A task, a pause, a moment of rest. These patterns help break the sense of endless time into manageable parts. You think back to the evening so far, the fire being tended, the meal, the quiet work with your hands, the listening. Each moment stands on its own yet also connects to the next. You shift your hands slightly, bringing them closer to the warmth again. The sensation is familiar now, no longer surprising. It simply continues part of the ongoing balance between warmth and cold. There is a curious detail found in some personal writings from the period. People sometimes described winter nights as having a different quality of time, one that felt slower, more reflective, less driven by urgency. It was not always comfortable, but it offered space for thought and stillness. You lean back further, letting your shoulders relax completely. The night continues steady and unbroken. Outside, the snow lies undisturbed. Inside, the same small circle of light and warmth defines your world. A quiet question has been explored in historical study. Did this slower pace of life feel restful, or did it carry a sense of confinement? Sitting here, you may feel both interpretations quietly present, each depending on how you view the moment. You let the thought pass. There is no need to resolve it. The fire crackles softly. The house remains firm. The animal nearby shifts slightly, then settles again. Everything continues as it has been. You become aware of how your own thoughts begin to slow, matching the pace of the room. They no longer move quickly from one idea to another. Instead, they linger, then fade, then return in a gentler form. Time passes, not marked, not measured, but felt. You remain within it, part of its steady unfolding. And as the night stretches on, you begin to understand that these long winter hours were not defined by constant activity. They were shaped by repetition, by stillness, and by the quiet way time moves when there is nothing to hurry it along. You remain seated within that slow repeating rhythm, letting the hours pass without needing to mark them when a different thought begins to take shape. It does not come from the room itself, but from just beyond it. Other people, not far away in distance perhaps, but separated by snow darkness and the limits of the night. You glance toward the door again, though you do not rise this time. The idea of stepping outside feels distant now, not because it is impossible, but because it would require effort that the moment does not call for. Still, the awareness remains. You are part of something larger, even if you cannot see it. A well-supported understanding of life in early 19th century America is that communities often relied on one another more heavily during winter months. Neighbors shared resources, offered assistance, and checked on one another when conditions allowed. Survival was rarely a solitary effort. You imagine that now. Another house perhaps not far from here holding its own small circle of light. Another fire being tended. Another set of quiet movements unfolding in a similar rhythm. There is a subtle detail that adds depth to this image. In some areas, paths between homes were maintained even during winter, not perfectly, but enough to allow occasional movement. These narrow routes became lifelines connecting people when they needed it most. You shift slightly in your seat, letting the thoughts settle. The room feels the same, yet the sense of connection expands it in a quiet way. The walls no longer feel like a boundary alone. They feel like part of a larger pattern of spaces, each holding its own warmth against the cold. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how these seasonal conditions influence relationships. Some suggest that shared hardship strengthened bonds, creating a deeper sense of community. Others note that isolation could still be felt strongly, especially in more remote areas. As you sit here, you may sense how both experiences could exist side by side. You lean forward slightly, bringing your hands closer to the fire again. The warmth greets you steady and familiar. It grounds you in the present moment even as your thoughts drift outward. There is a lesser-known observation from the time that adds texture to this moment. In some communities, people developed quiet signals to indicate their well-being during winter. Smoke rising from a chimney, a path kept clearer light visible through a window. These small signs reassured others that all was as it should be. You imagine that now. The faint glow of your own fire seen from a distance offering the same quiet message to someone else. You glance toward the window, though little can be seen beyond it. Still the thought remains. You're not alone in this night, even if you cannot see beyond your immediate space. The fire continues its steady motion. The house remains firm. The animal nearby rests without disturbance. The shapes of those sleeping remain still. All of it forms a small, complete world. And yet beyond it, other worlds continue in the same quiet way. There is a question that has been considered in studies of daily life during this period. Did people feel more connected through shared dependence, or more separated by the distances between them? Sitting here, you may feel that connection does not always require closeness. Sometimes it exists simply in knowing that others endure the same night. You let your shoulders relax, leaning back into the chair. The warmth settles around you, again easing the slight chill that lingers at the edges. Time continues its slow passage. The repetition remains, but now it carries a different tone, one shaped by awareness rather than isolation. You think briefly of the next day, of paths that may be walked, of voices that may be heard, of small exchanges that break the quiet pattern of winter nights. The thought does not pull you forward. It simply rests there, gentle and distant. A curious detail found in some personal accounts suggests that people often measured the strength of their community not during times of ease, but during seasons like this, when help was needed and given without much need for words. You can feel that idea now, even without action. It exists quietly, like the fire, like the warmth, like the steady presence of the night itself. You rest your hands in your lap, no longer reaching for the heat as often. Your body has settled into its balance. Your mind has followed, and as you sit within this calm, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not only about the space you occupied. They were also about the unseen connections that extended beyond it, linking one quiet room to another, across the stillness of snow and darkness. You sit with that quiet sense of connection for a while, letting it settle into the background like the steady glow of the fire. The room remains unchanged, yet your thoughts begin to turn inward again, drawn not by distance this time, but by something more reflective. A habit of mind, a way of passing the hours that ask for little movement. You glance toward a small object resting nearby. Perhaps a book, though not one often opened at night. Or perhaps something simpler, a worn surface, a familiar place where hands have rested before. You do not reach for it. Instead, you remain still, letting your thoughts gather slowly. A commonly recognized feature of life in early 19th century America is that religious practice often shaped daily routines, especially during long winter evenings. Prayer, quiet reflection, and moments of inward focus were part of how many people structured their time, offering a sense of order and meaning. You lower your gaze slightly, letting the firelight fall across your hands. The movement is small, almost unnoticeable, yet it carries a shift in attention. Outward awareness softens, inward awareness grows. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm continues steady and unforced. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. In many households, religious practice did not always take the form of formal ceremony. It often appeared in quiet, personal ways. A moment of thought, a few spoken words, a pause in the evening where attention turned inward rather than outward. You remain still, letting that possibility take shape. The fire continues its gentle motion. The house holds its quiet form. The night stretches on without interruption. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how these practices influence daily life. Some suggest they provided comfort and structure, especially during seasons of isolation. Others note that they reflected deeply held beliefs that shaped how people understood their place in the world. As you sit here, you may feel that both aspects exist quietly together. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep but to rest your attention. The sounds of the room remain present. The soft crackle of the fire, the faint movement of air, the slow breathing of those nearby. Yet they feel more distant now, as if they have stepped back to allow space for something else. There is a lesser-known observation from the time that adds texture to this experience. Some individuals used these quiet moments to reflect on the day that had passed, considering small actions, decisions, and events. It was not always formal, but it created a sense of continuity between one day and the next. You open your eyes again slowly. The room looks the same, yet your awareness of it feels softer, less focused on detail, and more on presence. You rest your hands together, feeling the warmth that remains in them. The act is simple, but it carries a quiet steadiness. There is a thoughtful question that has been explored in studies of historical daily life. Did these moments of reflection offer a deeper sense of peace, or were they simply part of a routine followed without much variation? Sitting here, you may feel that they provide something gentle, something that does not need to be defined to be meaningful. You lean back slightly, letting your body settle further into the chair. The firelight flickers softly, touching the edges of the room without fully illuminating them. The darkness remains, but it feels less distant now, more integrated, more part of the whole. A curious detail found in some personal writing suggests that people often describe these moments as a kind of pause within the night. Not an interruption, but a quiet space where time seemed to slow even further. You can sense that now. The rhythm of the evening softens. Your thoughts move more slowly. The need to act fades. You remain where you're aware of the warmth, the stillness, the quiet presence of everything around you. Outside, the snow continues its steady fall. Inside, the room holds its gentle balance. You take another slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The motion feels natural, effortless. And as you sit within this calm, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not only shaped by physical needs. They were also shaped by moments like this where thought, stillness, and quiet awareness offered a different kind of warmth. You remain in that quiet inward space for a while, your thoughts slowed to a gentle drift until your attention begins to settle on something even simpler. Not reflection, not sound, not movement, just the presence of the moment itself. The firelight flickers softly. You watch it without focusing too closely, letting your gaze rest somewhere between the flames and the shadows beyond. The shapes in the room soften further, their edges less defined, their presence more suggested than seen. You notice something small, a shift in how the light touches the objects around you, a brief moment where the glow seems warmer then cooler again. It is subtle, but once you see it, it becomes easier to follow. A widely accepted observation from historical accounts is that in environments with limited light, people often became more attuned to small visual changes. The way shadows moved, the way light fell across surfaces, even the faintest variations could hold attention in a quiet, steady way. You lean back slightly, allowing your body to rest more fully. There is no need to move, no task waiting, no decision required. The night has reached a point where stillness becomes its own activity. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. Some individuals in this period described finding quiet enjoyment in simple, visual patterns during long evenings. The movement of firelight, the shifting of shadows, the texture of wood grain revealed and concealed. These were not distractions, but gentle points of focus. You let your eyes follow the light again. It moves slowly across the wall, stretching, shrinking, changing shape with each subtle movement of the flame. It does not repeat exactly. Each moment is slightly different from the last. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people pass time during long periods of inactivity. Some suggest that attention turned naturally towards small sensory details, filling the absence of larger events. Others believe that this focus offered a form of quiet rest, allowing the mind to settle without effort. As you sit here, you may feel how easily your attention rests on these small changes. You take a slow breath, inhale, exhale. The rhythm continues steady and calm. The room feels more distant now, even though you have not moved. The edges fade slightly from your awareness, leaving only the central glow and the soft presence of warmth. There is a lesser-known observation from the time that adds texture to this experience. Some people described winter evenings as a period where thought became less structured, more fluid, drifting from one idea to another without urgency or direction. You can feel that now. Your thoughts do not settle on anything in particular. They move gently, then fade, then return in a softer form. You shift your hands slightly in your lap, the movement small and unhurried. The warmth that remains in your fingers feels steady, no longer something you actively seek, but something that simply exists. The fire continues its quiet motion. The animal nearby remains still. The shapes resting in the dimness do not move. Everything holds its place. There is a thoughtful question that has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did these long stretches of stillness feel empty, or did they offer a different kind of fullness, one built from small details and quiet awareness? Sitting here, you may sense that stillness carries its own kind of richness. You let your gaze soften further. The light blurs slightly, the edges of objects blending into one another. It becomes less about seeing clearly and more about feeling the presence of the space. A curious detail found in some personal writing suggests that people often experienced a kind of gentle detachment during these hours, where the boundary between observation and rest became less distinct. You remain in that state now, not fully focused, not fully asleep, balanced somewhere in between. The night continues its slow passage. Outside, the snow falls without interruption. Inside, the quiet deepens, settling into something almost complete. You take another slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The motion feels effortless, natural, and as you sit within this soft, steady stillness, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not always filled with action or thought. Sometimes they were simply experienced, moment by moment, light by shadow, breath by breath. You remain in that softened state for a while, where the firelight and your thoughts seem to move at the same unhurried pace. Nothing calls for your attention, yet slowly something practical returns. Not a demand, but a quiet reminder. There are always small things to maintain, even in the deepest part of the night. You shift slightly in your seat, your gaze drifting toward a few tools resting nearby. They are simple, worn from use, placed within reach, as if they belong to the evening as much as the fire does. You lean forward and pick one up, turning it in your hands. The surface feels familiar, edges softened by time, shaped by repeated use rather than design. It fits naturally in your grip, as if it has learned the shape of your hand. A commonly accepted feature of winter life in early 19th century America is that the colder months provided an opportunity for maintenance work that could not always be done during busier seasons. Tools were repaired, handles adjusted, small damages corrected. It was not dramatic work, but it was essential. You run your thumb along the edge of the tool. There is a slight roughness, a place where wear has taken its toll. Nothing severe, but enough to notice. You reach for a small piece of material, perhaps a strip of cloth or a bit of oil, and begin to work carefully. The motion is slow, deliberate. You do not rush. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. Many tools during this period were expected to last for years, sometimes passed down or shared. Maintenance was not occasional. It was part of their continued usefulness, ensuring that each item remained reliable when needed. You adjust your position slightly, bringing the tool closer to the light. The fire flickers, offering just enough illumination to guide your work. You turn the object, examining it from different angles, letting your hands do most of the understanding. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people valued objects in this era. Some suggest that the effort required to create and maintain items led to a deeper sense of care and attention. Others believe it was simply necessity, a practical response to limited resources. As you sit here, you may feel how both ideas quietly exist within the act. You continue your work, smoothing, adjusting, restoring. Each movement is small yet purposeful, the kind of effort that does not draw attention but gradually makes a difference. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often described a sense of quiet satisfaction in repairing something, even if the change was minor. The act itself carried meaning, not just the result. You can feel that now. The tool in your hands begins to feel more complete, more balanced. Not new, but ready. You pause for a moment, lifting it slightly to inspect your work. The difference is subtle, yet it is there. You set the tool aside with care, placing it back where it belongs. The action feels natural, as if it completes a small cycle within the larger rhythm of the night. You lean back again, letting your hands rest. The warmth of the fire returns to your awareness, though it no longer feels as central as before. It is simply part of the space, steady and reliable. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. Some households would use winter evenings to prepare not just for the present, but for the seasons ahead. Small repairs made now could prevent larger problems later, creating a quiet sense of readiness. You consider that briefly. The idea of future work, future days, future needs. It does not pull you forward. It simply exists gently alongside the present moment. You glance around the room once more. Everything remains as it was. The fire burns. The shapes in the dimness remain still. The night continues without interruption. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did these small acts of maintenance provide a sense of control in an environment shaped by uncertainty, or were they simply part of a routine that required no deeper thought? Sitting here, you may feel that even the simplest actions can carry a quiet sense of purpose. You rest your hands in your lap once more. The tool is set aside. The task is complete. The room returns to stillness, and as the night stretches on, you begin to understand that these long winter evenings were not only about enduring the cold. They were also about caring for the small things that made daily life possible, one quiet task at a time. You let your hands rest after the small repair the tool now returned to its place, and for a while the room settles again into its steady quiet. The fire continues to glow, the shadows remain soft, and the night moves forward without drawing attention to itself. Then, almost without warning, you notice something lighter. Not a sound exactly, not a movement that demands focus, but a small shift in feeling, a moment of ease. You lean back slightly and let your gaze drift across the room. The shapes you have come to know so well now feel less distant, less defined by shadow. The firelight seems warmer, though it has not changed. It is your awareness that has softened. There is a widely recognized understanding that even in difficult seasons, people found ways to create small moments of comfort and quiet enjoyment. Winter evenings were not only about survival, they were also about finding balance, however simple, within the limits of the environment. You notice it now in the smallest details, the way the warmth rests gently against your hands without needing to be sought, the way the room feels settled, not demanding attention, the way your breathing continues slow and steady without effort. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. Some individuals in this period found comfort in repetitive, familiar sensations rather than in new experiences. The same chair, the same fire, the same quiet routine. These familiar elements created a sense of stability during long unchanging nights. You shift slightly, adjusting your position just enough to feel more at ease. The chair supports you without resistance. The fabric around your shoulders rests where it should. The warmth remains present, steady, but not overwhelming. There has been thoughtful reflection among historians about how people experience comfort in environments with limited resources. Some suggest that the absence of excess made small pleasures more noticeable. Others believe that comfort was redefined entirely shaped by necessity rather than choice. As you sit here, you may feel how even a slight easing of tension can become meaningful. You let your eyes rest on the fire again. The flames move gently, their light shifting in a slow and familiar pattern. You do not watch them closely. You simply allow them to exist within your awareness. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often described moments of quiet contentment during winter evenings, not tied to any specific event, but arising from the simple balance of warmth, stillness and presence. You can feel that now. Nothing has changed, and yet something has settled. You rest your hands together, feeling the remaining warmth in your fingers. The need to move has faded. The need to think has softened. You simply remain. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. In some households, small forms of quiet entertainment would appear during these hours. A simple tune hummed under the breath, a soft repetition of words. Nothing that disturbed the stillness, only something that accompanied it. You imagine that now. A faint melody, barely audible, blending into the rhythm of the room. It does not draw attention. It does not ask to be followed. It simply exists. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The motion feels natural, effortless. The room holds its quiet balance. The fire continues its steady work. The shapes in the dimness remain still. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did these small moments of ease stand out more because of the surrounding hardship, or were they simply part of a broader rhythm that people accepted without distinction? Sitting here, you may feel that comfort does not always need contrast to be felt. You lean back slightly, allowing your body to rest fully. The night continues steady and unbroken. Outside, the snow lies quiet and undisturbed. Inside, the warmth remains. The stillness deepens. And as you sit within this calm, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not only defined by effort or endurance, they were also shaped by moments like this. Simple, quiet, enough. You remain in that quiet ease for a while, letting the warmth and stillness hold you without effort. The fire continues its gentle movement, the room stays settled, and your thoughts drift without direction. Then slowly something changes again, not in the room itself, but in the way your mind begins to wander. You glance towards the darker edges of the space where the firelight no longer reaches fully. The shadows there feel deeper now, more complete. They do not move, yet they seem to hold something not visible, but present in a way that draws your attention. You do not feel afraid. Not exactly, but there is a quiet awareness, a sense of what might exist beyond the circle of light. A widely noted aspect of life in earlier centuries is that darkness carried a different weight than it does today. Without artificial light to fill every corner, people lived alongside shadows in a more constant way. The unknown was not something distant. It existed just beyond what could be seen. You sit still, letting your eyes adjust once more. The shapes do not change. The furniture remains where it is. The walls hold their form, and yet your mind begins to imagine. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. In many communities, stories and beliefs about what might exist in the darkness were passed down through generations. Not always as firm beliefs, but as quiet possibilities that lingered in the background of daily life. You listen again. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves faintly outside. The animal nearby breathes in a slow, steady rhythm. Nothing suggests danger, and still the shadows remain. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people perceived darkness during this time. Some suggest it encouraged imagination, allowing the mind to fill in what could not be seen. Others believe it fostered a deeper acceptance of the unknown, where not everything required explanation. As you sit here, you may feel how both ideas quietly exist together. You shift slightly in your seat, bringing yourself a little closer to the fire. The warmth reaches you again, grounding you. The light softens the edges of the room, pushing the shadows back just enough to make them feel less distant. You glance once more toward the darker corner. It looks the same as before, unchanged, and yet the act of looking feels different. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often described moments where their imagination would briefly take hold during long nights, especially when the environment was quiet and dim. These moments were usually short, passing quickly once attention returned to the present. You can feel that now. The thought forms, then fades. The shadow remains just a shadow. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm steadies you. The room returns to its familiar balance. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. In some households, keeping the fire well tended was not only about warmth, but also about maintaining light strong enough to reduce uncertainty in the room. A brighter flame meant clearer shapes, fewer places for the imagination to wander. You glance toward the fire again. It burns steadily, offering enough light to define the space without fully revealing it. You let your gaze rest there. The flicker becomes your focus once more. The shadows lose their pull. The room feels whole again. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did living with darkness make people more cautious, or did it simply become part of the environment accepted without much thought? Sitting here, you may feel that it depends on the moment, on the mind, on the quiet space between awareness and imagination. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The earlier tension fades completely. The fire continues its gentle motion. The house remains steady. The night stretches on without interruption. You rest your hands in your lap, no longer drawn toward the edges of the room. The warmth holds you. The stillness returns. And as you sit within it, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not only about what was present, they were also about what was unseen, and how the mind in quiet moments could wander there before gently finding its way back again. You let your attention settle back onto the fire, allowing the shadows to lose their hold, and for a while the room returns to its familiar balance. The warmth rests gently against you, the stillness deepens, and your thoughts move more slowly again. Then, almost without noticing at first, something subtle begins to change. Not in the fire, not in the room, but beyond it. You lift your gaze, slightly drawn toward the window. It remains dark, yet there is a faint difference now, something difficult to name. The darkness outside no longer feels as complete as it did before. You remain still watching. The change is not sudden. It does not arrive in a clear moment. It builds quietly, almost invisibly, until you begin to sense it more than see it. The night is shifting. A widely observed detail from historical accounts is that during winter the gradual return of daylight was often noticed not by the sun itself, but by small changes in the quality of darkness before dawn. People who spent long nights awake became attuned to these subtle transitions. You lean slightly forward, focusing more closely. The window holds a faint, barely perceptible light. Not enough to illuminate anything, but enough to soften the deep black that filled it earlier. It is a quiet signal, one that does not demand attention, yet once noticed cannot be ignored. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. In times without artificial lighting to mask natural changes, people often recognize the approach of morning through shifts in color and tone, rather than clear brightness. A hint of grey, a slight easing of shadow. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm remains steady, but now it carries a different awareness. The night is not endless. It is moving towards something. There's been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people experienced the gradual return of daylight during winter. Some suggest it brought a sense of relief after long hours of darkness. Others believe it was simply part of a natural cycle expected and accepted without strong emotion. As you sit here, you may feel a quiet recognition, something gentle rather than dramatic. You glance back toward the fire. Its light remains steady, yet it feels less central now. Not diminished, but joined by something else. A second source of faint illumination far away, just beginning to emerge. You shift slightly in your seat, adjusting your position. The room feels different, though nothing within it has changed. The edges seem softer, the shadows less complete. The presence of approaching light alters the space in subtle ways. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often describe these early moments before dawn as a kind of in-between state, where night had not fully ended, but morning had already begun to announce itself. You can feel that now. The stillness remains, yet it carries a sense of transition. The fire crackles softly. The house holds its quiet form. The animal nearby remains still. The shapes resting in the dimness do not move. Everything continues, yet everything is gently shifting. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. In some households, these early hours were used to prepare for the coming day even before full light arrived. Small movements would begin quiet at first, then gradually more defined. You imagine that now, a slow rising, a careful step. The beginning of activity still distant but approaching. You look once more toward the window. The faint light has grown slightly, though it remains soft and indistinct. It does not reveal the landscape, only suggests its presence. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did the approach of morning feel like a release from the long night, or simply the next part of a continuous cycle? Sitting here, you may feel that it carries both meanings depending on how you meet it. You lean back again, letting your body remain at rest. There is no need to rise yet. The night still holds you even as it begins to fade. You rest your hands in your lap, feeling the warmth that remains from the fire. The rhythm continues, steady, unbroken. And as you sit within this gentle transition, you begin to understand that these long winter nights did not end all at once. They softened. They shifted. They gave way slowly, allowing the return of light to unfold with the same quiet patience that defined the night itself. You remain seated for a while, watching that faint shift at the window, letting it grow without needing to follow it too closely. The fire still offers its steady warmth, but now it feels less like the only source of light, and more like part of a wider change taking place. The night is loosening its hold. You notice it not just in the window, but in the room itself. The shadows no longer seem as deep. The edges of objects feel a little clearer, though still soft. It is as if the space is preparing to be seen again. You take a slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm remains calm, but now it carries a quiet sense of movement forward. A widely noted feature of winter mornings in early 19th century America is that the return of light often revealed the effects of the night in subtle ways. Snow drifted differently across the ground. Paths disappeared or reappeared. The landscape shifted while people slept. You glance toward the door again, imagining what lies beyond it now. The same yard you saw earlier has likely changed. The snow has settled further, perhaps smoothing over the marks you left. The world outside has continued its quiet work without you. You lean slightly forward as if considering whether to rise. But you remain where you are. There is no urgency yet. The transition from night to day is slow, especially in winter. It does not call you to action immediately. It allows you to remain in stillness just a little longer. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. In many households, the first signs of morning did not bring instant activity. People often waited for enough light to make movement easier, conserving energy, and allowing the day to begin at a natural pace. You settle back again, letting your body rest. The fire continues to burn, though you can sense it has reached a quieter stage. The flames are smaller, more contained, yet still steady. The room feels balanced between two states. Not fully night, not fully day. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people experience this transition. Some suggest it was one of the calmest parts of the day, a brief pause before work began. Others believe it carried a sense of quiet anticipation, as the responsibilities of daylight approached. As you sit here, you may feel both the calm and the expectation gently present. You glance once more toward the window. The light has grown slightly stronger now. Still soft, still muted, but enough to suggest shape beyond the glass. The darkness is no longer complete. There is a curious observation found in some personal writings from the time. People often described winter mornings as revealing the world slowly, detail by detail, rather than all at once. It required patience to see clearly again. You can sense that now. The room remains familiar, yet it is beginning to show itself more fully. The edges of the table, the lines of the walls, the outline of objects that were only shadows before. You shift your hands slightly, noticing how the light touches them differently now. The warmth remains, but it's no longer the only thing you feel. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this experience. In some homes, the fire would be allowed to burn lower as morning approached, conserving fuel for later in the day. The return of light reduced the need for strong indoor illumination. You glance at the hearth again. It continues its quiet work, though its role is beginning to change. You take another slow breath. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm carries you forward. The night has not ended suddenly. It has eased into something new. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did people feel a clear boundary between night and day, or did one simply blend into the other during seasons like this? Sitting here, you may feel that the transition is gentle enough to blur that line. You remain seated, letting the moment stretch just a little longer. There is no need to rush. The day will come. The tasks will follow. For now there is only this, the soft light, the steady warmth, the quiet presence of a night that is slowly giving way. And as you sit within it, you begin to understand that the end of these long winter nights was not marked by a sudden change. It was revealed gradually through light returning one small step at a time. You remain seated as the soft light continues to gather, letting the final moments of night pass without interruption. The fire burns low beside you, no longer the sole centre of the room, yet still present, still steady, as if it too is easing into the change. The space feels different now, not because anything has been moved, but because everything can be seen a little more clearly. The outlines that once blurred into shadow begin to settle into form. The table, the walls, the small objects resting where they have always been. All of it returns gently to view. You take a slow breath. Inhale. Exhale. The rhythm continues calm and unhurried. A widely recognized aspect of winter mornings in early 19th century America is that they often began quietly without sudden motion or noise. The transition from night to day was gradual, shaped by light rather than urgency. You can feel that now as the room reveals itself without demanding that you rise. You glance once more toward the window. The faint grey has deepened, though it remains soft, filtered through the cold air beyond. The world outside is still but no longer hidden. It waits just as it did the night before, though changed in ways you have yet to see. You shift slightly in your seat, feeling the warmth that remains in your clothing. It has settled into you, not as strongly as before, but enough to carry you forward. The cold still exists, waiting just beyond the door, but it no longer presses as it did at the beginning of the night. There is a small detail that adds depth to this moment. Many households during this period would begin their day by carefully managing what remained from the night. The fire might be stirred, embers gathered, and new fuel added only when needed. Nothing was wasted. Everything was carried forward with intention. You glance at the hearth again. The embers glow softly now, their light less active, more settled. They hold the memory of the night ready to be built upon again when required. There has been thoughtful discussion among historians about how people experience the end of long winter nights. Some suggest it brought a quiet sense of accomplishment, having endured the hours of darkness. Others believe it was simply part of a continuous cycle, one that did not require reflection. As you sit here, you may feel a gentle awareness of both. You place your hands on your knees and lean forward slightly. The movement is small, but it carries a shift. The night is ending. The day, though still quiet, is beginning to take its place. You pause before rising, allowing the moment to linger. There is no need to hurry. The stillness has not vanished, it has only changed. A curious observation found in some personal writings from the time suggests that early morning often felt like a continuation of the night, rather than a clear beginning. The same quiet, the same slow pace, only touched by light instead of darkness. You can sense that now. The room remains calm. The sounds are minimal. The presence of those resting nearby continues, though some may begin to stir soon. You rise slowly from your seat. Your body responds with a gentle release, the stiffness of stillness easing as you stand. The floor beneath your feet feels cool, but not sharply so. You take a step, then another, moving with the same quiet awareness that has carried you through the night. There is a lesser-known detail that adds texture to this moment. In many homes, the first movements of morning were done with care, preserving the calm of the early hours before the demands of the day fully arrived. You move toward the hearth, kneeling slightly. With a careful motion, you adjust the embers, bringing them together. A small flame begins to rise again, not for the night now, but for the day ahead. You watch it for a moment. The light grows steady and patient. You rise again, turning slightly toward the window. The outside world is visible now, though still muted by the early light. Snow lies undisturbed, smooth and quiet. The path you walked before has softened, nearly erased by the night's work. A quiet question has been explored in studies of daily life during this period. Did each morning feel like a new beginning, or simply the next step in an ongoing rhythm? Standing here, you may feel that both are true, each shaping the experience in its own way. You take one final slow breath. Inhale. Exhale. The night has passed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, one moment at a time. And as you stand within this soft return of light, you begin to understand that these long winter nights were not meant to be rushed through. They were lived, carefully, quietly, from the first fall of snow to the gentle arrival of morning. The room holds its calm. The fire begins again. The day waits just beyond the door, and you carry the quiet rhythm of the night with you even as it fades. Now as the morning settles in and the world begins its slow return to movement, you allow yourself to pause once more. The fire warms gently behind you, the faint light continues to grow, and the stillness of the night softens into something lighter, something easier to hold. You do not need to rush forward. You do not need to think of what comes next. Instead, you remain here for just a moment longer, breathing slowly, feeling the warmth that lingers in your hands and the calm that has settled in your chest. The long winter night has passed, but it has left something behind. A quiet steadiness, a slower rhythm, a sense of balance that does not disappear with the light. Outside, the snow reflects the early morning soft and undisturbed. Inside, the room holds its gentle warmth, carrying the memory of firelight and stillness. You take one more slow breath. Inhale, exhale. And as your thoughts begin to drift, you allow the calm of the night to remain with you, fading gently like the last glow of embers. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to follow, only rest, sweet dreams,